Every time you lock eyes with a stranger, smile at a friend, or recall the face of someone you once loved, your brain whispers a secret you cannot hear. None of those faces exist exactly as you think they do. They are not photographs captured in your mind, nor stable images waiting in memory. Instead, they are projections, assembled fragments of light, past experiences, emotions, and expectations. Your brain does not see. It invents. It creates faces the same way it creates dreams, by layering patterns onto empty space until they feel real enough to trust. When you look at someone, what you meet is not their true face, but your brain's best guess of who they are. And in that guesswork lies a paradox. Every face you have ever seen may only exist inside your mind, a fragile mask woven by memory and imagination. The story of faces begins not with sight, but with memory. From the moment you are born, your brain begins constructing a library of features, eyes, lips, lines, shapes, that it believes belong to human faces. This library is not accurate. It is distorted by the accidents of perception, the emotional weight of encounters, and the fading quality of recall. Think of the first faces you ever saw, your mother, your father, the blurry outlines of caretakers leaning over your crib. These impressions become scaffolding, a template that every later face is compared against. You never truly see a new face. You see how it fits into this living archive of memories. Neuroscientists call this process pattern recognition, but in reality, it is more like a ghostly collage. When you recognize a friend across the street, you are not retrieving their image like a saved file on a computer. Instead, your brain quickly reconstructs a face from pieces, the curve of the jaw stored from one memory, the squint of their smile from another, and the voice layered on top to confirm the illusion. Each glance is a recreation, and each recreation drifts further from the original. The more you see a person, the more your memory overwrites itself with approximations, until the version you carry inside may no longer match the one standing before you. This is why memories of faces can feel so slippery. Think about someone you once knew well but have not seen in years. You try to picture them, and what arrives is an unstable blur, perhaps the outline of their hair, a gesture they often made, the color of their eyes if you strain hard enough. But the complete face, the exact arrangement of every feature, refuses to appear. The truth is, it was never stored in full. Your brain only ever kept fragments, and now those fragments wobble in your mind like shards of glass in shifting light. Psychological experiments confirm this strange process. Studies on eyewitness testimony reveal that people are startlingly poor at recalling faces. When participants are asked to describe a suspect or pick one out of a lineup, they often fail, swapping details, merging strangers together, or even recognizing people they have never seen. This is because the brain relies on familiarity, not accuracy. A face feels right if it resonates with patterns already inside memory, even if the details are wrong. In this sense, faces are never seen, they are felt. Consider the phenomenon of false recognition. Sometimes you pass someone in a crowd and swear you know them. For a split second, the face seems familiar, almost intimate. Yet when you look again, you realize they are a stranger. What happened in that instant is a memory misfire. Your brain matched the new face with old fragments, and the projection seemed real. It was only when you examined closer that the illusion dissolved. Every face carries echoes of others, and every recognition is a gamble. Memory is also what binds faces to emotion. When you think of a loved one, you may not clearly recall their features, but you feel warmth, comfort, grief, or longing. These emotions become stitched into the reconstruction. In fact, neuroscientists suggest that the emotional weight you attach to a face often overrides accuracy. This is why faces in dreams appear distorted yet recognizable. You are not seeing their features, but the emotional memory of them. A parent may appear younger than they ever were. A friend may shift between different versions of themselves, and yet you still know who they are. The brain's memory of faces is not just imperfect. It is creative. It invents details where none exist, fills gaps with imagined lines, and smooths over inconsistencies until the result feels coherent. But coherence is not truth. Coherence is only the brain's way of protecting you from the terrifying possibility that you never really see anyone at all. If every face is made of memory, then what happens when memory fails? The phenomenon of prosopagnosia, or face blindness, shows us people with this condition cannot recognize even close family members by their features. To them, faces collapse into unfamiliar patterns, and identity must be pieced together from voices, clothing, or mannerisms. Yet, in a strange way, this condition only exposes what is true for all of us. that faces are reconstructions, not absolutes. For most people, the illusion is strong enough to pass as reality. For those with prosopagnosia, the mask falls apart. The unsettling truth is that every face you know, your mother's, your child's, your own in the mirror, lives inside your brain as a shifting memory, not a permanent image. And just as memory rewrites itself each time it is summoned, the faces you see are rewritten too. Perhaps this is why people sometimes look different every time you meet them. You are not seeing them change, you are seeing your projection evolve. So when you gaze into the face of someone dear, ask yourself, do you see them as they are, or do you see the mosaic of memories your brain has woven in their place? Stand before a mirror. Look closely at the face that stares back at you. At first, it seems familiar. So familiar that it almost feels like truth. Yet, linger long enough, and something unsettling happens. The features begin to warp. The eyes seem slightly misplaced. The mouth begins to twitch in ways you don't expect. The entire face feels foreign. This is not a trick of poor lighting or faulty glass. It is your brain failing at holding its own projection together. The mirror illusion is the unsettling reminder that even your own face is not yours. It is an approximation, constructed and constantly reassembled in real time. Psychologists have studied this uncanny effect with something called the strange face illusion. Participants asked to stare at themselves in a dimly lit mirror, often report seeing their own features morph into monstrous distortions, animal-like shapes, or even the faces of relatives long gone. The brain, forced to process the same static image without interruption, begins filling in blanks with memories, fears, and fragments of imagination. What you see in the mirror is not stable. It is a fluid hallucination, wearing the costume of your identity. The paradox deepens when you realize that even under normal conditions, the reflection is an illusion. Your brain does not see your face as it is, but as it expects it to be. When you smile in the mirror, what you perceive is not a direct image, but a delayed interpretation. Light bounces off the glass, travels into your eyes, is inverted, corrected, and stitched together by neurons before it reaches awareness. By the time you see yourself, microseconds have already passed. You are always looking at a face that no longer exists in the present. This delay may sound trivial, but its implications are enormous. Imagine every moment you have ever looked into a mirror. Every expression, every frown, every attempt to find yourself. None of those moments showed you reality. They showed you a projection from the past, a reconstructed face filtered through expectation and memory. Your reflection is not who you are. It is who your brain thinks you are, updated moment by moment, always a fraction behind. Experiments in neuroscience reinforce this fragile relationship with our reflection. Studies on body dysmorphic disorder reveal how some people cannot see their own faces accurately. They obsess over flaws that others cannot detect, distortions created entirely by the brain's own misfiring projection system. The mirror becomes a battlefield where reality and perception wage war, and the victim is identity itself. Even those without such disorders experience smaller versions of this war. Why does your face sometimes look beautiful in one glance, and unrecognizable in the next? The answer is simple. The face is never fixed, because the brain is never still. But the illusion does not end with distortion. The act of self-recognition itself is a paradox. To recognize yourself in the mirror requires your brain to treat your own face as both familiar and foreign. Familiar, because it must match the projection stored in memory. Foreign, because it is an external object in space, separated from the self observing it. Every glance into the mirror is a negotiation between these two truths. You are both subject and object, both the perceiver and the perceived. This is why mirror gazing often leads to existential unease. You are not just looking at a reflection, you are confronting the split nature of your own consciousness. The philosopher Jacques Lacan described this phenomenon as the mirror stage, the moment in infancy when a child first recognizes themselves in a reflection. For Lacan, this recognition was not a simple moment of self-discovery, but the birth of an illusion, the illusion of a coherent identity. The child sees the reflection as a whole, unified body, but inside, they still feel fragmented. From then on, the self is always haunted by this dissonance. You appear whole on the outside, but you feel fractured within. The mirror, then, is not a tool of clarity. It is the birthplace of misrecognition. Consider what happens when you stare at yourself too long. The longer you gaze, the less you feel like yourself. The smile stiffens. The eyes turn hollow. The sense of me begins to dissolve. Some people describe this as frightening, others as spiritual, a peeling away of the mask that the brain struggles to maintain. The mirror reveals not your face but the fragility of the projection behind it. In a sense, it shows you that you are a stranger to yourself. This illusion is also why mirrors can carry such symbolic weight in myth and folklore, from Narcissus falling in love with his own reflection, to legends of spirits appearing when you chant their name in glass. Mirrors have always been portals, not to another world, but to the instability of the one inside your mind. The fear is not that the mirror lies. The fear is that it tells the truth. You are only ever meeting a projection, never the real thing. And so, every time you glance into a mirror, you are caught in a loop. You look for reassurance, a stable sense of identity, but what you find is a shifting mask that changes with lighting, emotion, expectation and memory. Sometimes it flatters you, sometimes it betrays you, sometimes it terrifies you, but it is never you. It is your brain's projection of you. The face you think you know best may, in fact, be the one you have never truly seen. So the next time you stare into your reflection, let the illusion wash over you. Ask yourself, is this my face? Or is this only the memory of what I believe myself to be? The mirror will not answer. It will only reflect the mask your brain has painted, shimmering for a moment before dissolving into the endless theater of perception. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. You see their face. But what does seeing really mean? The moment their features reach your eyes, billions of neurons inside your brain ignite, like sparks across a dark sky. These neurons do not simply record the stranger's face like a camera would. They interpret, filter, and construct. They take scattered points of light and shadow, edges and contrasts, and transform them into what you call a face. But here lies the paradox. What you believe to be their face is not stored anywhere in your brain. It is painted anew each time by the firing of neurons, a living artwork that vanishes as quickly as it appears. The process begins in the retina, where photons are translated into signals. From there, the signals travel through the optic nerve into the visual cortex, where the world is broken down into patterns, lines, shapes, movements. Specialized clusters of neurons, known as face-selective regions, respond with heightened intensity whenever a human face is present. One of the most famous is the fusiform face area, a patch of tissue that seems devoted to recognizing faces. Yet even here, the brain is not capturing reality. It is creating probabilities, stitching together fragments to form what it predicts a face should be. This prediction is essential, because the information you receive is incomplete. Shadows obscure, angles distort, features shift with emotion. If your brain relied only on raw data, every face would be a blur of uncertainty. Instead, neurons work like artists with memory as their palette. They fill in missing details, smooth over inconsistencies, and project stability onto chaos. The result is not a face as it is, but a face as your brain believes it should be. Consider how quickly this happens. Recognition occurs in less than 200 milliseconds, faster than the blink of an eye. In that blink, your brain has already painted the stranger's face, compared it against thousands of stored fragments, and decided whether they are familiar or unknown. This lightning speed reveals that recognition is not passive, but predictive. You don't wait to see a full face. Your neurons rush ahead, sketching the likely features before they even fully appear. In essence, you are always meeting people slightly ahead of reality, encountering projections instead of raw presence. Neuroscientists have explored this through experiments with ambiguous images. Show someone a blurred or pixelated face, and their brain often fills in details that aren't there, eyebrows that don't exist, smiles that never happened. These phantom features arise because the brain insists on completing the image, refusing to leave gaps. Your neurons are painters who cannot bear an unfinished canvas. The stranger's face you see, then, may contain more of your own invention than of their reality. This creativity explains why faces can shift in memory. Meet someone briefly, and later you might recall them differently. Taller, sharper, softer. What changed was not them, but the neural painting your brain produced. Each recollection is not a replay of a stored image, but a repainting, and with each repainting, distortions creep in. The stranger you remember may no longer match the stranger who exists. In fact, over time, the painted version becomes more real to you than the original encounter ever was. But this neural artistry has darker sides. Consider cases of misrecognition syndromes, such as Capgras delusion, where patients believe loved ones have been replaced by imposters. The visual system still paints the correct face, but the emotional response fails to attach. The brain perceives the features but no longer feels the familiarity. As a result, the painted face feels wrong, as though belonging to a stranger wearing a mask. Here we see how fragile the process is. The painting can be technically correct yet emotionally alien. Even in everyday life, this fragility lingers. Think about how you sometimes misinterpret expressions. A neutral face might appear angry. A faint smile might seem mocking. These errors arise because neurons don't just paint features, they paint meaning. The stranger's raised eyebrow becomes suspicion because your brain projects suspicion onto it. Their glance feels kind or hostile because your neurons color it with emotional paint. What you see is not just features but stories, shaped by your own expectations. This raises a haunting thought. Every stranger you meet is partly your own creation. Their face is not an independent reality, but a canvas your neurons transform into coherence. In that sense, you never meet them as they are. You meet them as you are, through the biases, memories and patterns that your brain insists upon. The stranger you see is a mirror of your neural architecture, painted in their likeness, but colored by your mind. Art offers a curious parallel here. Portrait painters often confess that no matter how faithfully they try to render a subject, traces of their own style and self creep into the image. The painting is never just the sitter, it is also the painter. Your brain is no different. The faces it paints are never just the people, they are reflections of you. So when you look into the eyes of someone you do not know, remember that you are not simply observing them, you are engaging in a creative act, a neural performance of extraordinary speed and complexity. The stranger's face is not passively seen, it is actively invented. Their features, their presence, their identity, each is the result of neurons painting in real time, using you as the brush. And when you walk away, when the stranger fades into memory, what remains is not them but the afterimage, your neurons left behind, a fragile painting on the canvas of your mind, destined to blur, shift and evolve until the original is lost forever. The face of the stranger, like every face, is not a truth but a projection, fleeting and unstable, yet powerful enough to define the very fabric of human connection. Have you ever glanced at someone in a crowd and felt a sudden jolt of recognition, only to realize a moment later that they were a complete stranger? That fleeting shock, that instant of mistaken identity, is one of the most profound clues to how faces actually live inside your mind. What you experience in those moments is not reality breaking, but memory echoing. The brain does not simply present faces as they are, it resonates with echoes of past encounters, layering familiarity onto the unknown, until the distinction between memory and presence begins to dissolve. This phenomenon is built into the very machinery of perception. Neuroscientists describe it as pattern completion. When you see a face, the brain compares it to fragments of other faces you've seen before. If enough overlap exists, shape of the eyes, curve of the nose, tone of the skin, the brain leaps to recognition, flooding you with the feeling of familiarity. But the recognition is often wrong. What you are sensing is not the person before you, but the echo of someone else, summoned by resemblance. Think of how many times you've said, "You remind me of someone." That phrase is not casual, it is diagnostic. It reveals that the face in front of you has triggered an echo. The person does not exist independently in your perception. They exist in relation to the archive already inside your mind. Every new face you encounter is filtered through this library of echoes. In truth, you never see anyone as entirely new. You see them as variations of those you have already known. These echoes can be powerful enough to bend memory itself. Studies on eyewitnesses show how people often misidentify strangers as criminals, not because they resemble the suspect directly but because they resemble someone the witness saw in a different context. Psychologists call this unconscious transference. The echo of familiarity is so persuasive that the brain insists the person must have been seen before, even when they have not. Memory is not a reliable archive, but an echo chamber, replaying fragments until they distort into false recognition. Even everyday life is haunted by this mechanism. Walk into a new workplace, and you may feel instant trust toward one colleague, suspicion toward another. Why? Because their faces echo people from your past. The trusted colleague may resemble a kind teacher, the suspicious one an old rival. You are not reacting to who they are but to who your brain has decided they remind you of. Relationships begin not with truth, but with echoes. The emotional weight of these echoes cannot be overstated. Familiarity itself produces comfort. Studies show that people rate faces they have seen even once as more likable than entirely novel ones. This is called the mere exposure effect. Your neurons mistake repetition for safety, and the echo of a familiar pattern feels reassuring, even if it belongs to a stranger. The effect is so strong that advertisers and politicians rely on it, saturating you with images until their faces feel trustworthy, not because of their character but because of your brain's bias for echoes. But echoes can deceive in darker ways. Consider déjà vu, that eerie sensation of having seen a face or place before. Neuroscience suggests that déjà vu may arise when familiarity circuits fire without context. The brain echoes recognition without providing the memory to support it. The result is a haunting paradox. You feel certain you have encountered this face before, and yet no narrative can explain when or where. It is as though your brain is whispering fragments from a memory that never truly existed. This echo phenomenon reveals something unsettling about identity itself. If every face you see is filtered through resemblance, then no one is ever fully themselves in your perception. Each person is part them and part someone else, a palimpsest of echoes layered onto the present. You do not meet people as they are. You meet them as your memory allows you to. The stranger you see is haunted by ghosts of your past. Philosophy too has wrestled with this. The phenomenologist Edmund Husserl argued that all perception is shaped by retention, the lingering trace of past experiences that colors the present. A face is never just what stands before you, it is always entangled with what came before. Memory leaks into perception until the two are inseparable. What you call familiarity is not truth but resonance, the vibration of old patterns across the surface of the new. In dreams, this resonance becomes even more pronounced. Have you noticed how dream characters often feel familiar, even when their faces are incomplete or shifting? That is your brain pulling echoes of people you have known, recombining them into strange composites. A dream stranger may have your brother's eyes, your childhood friend's smile, and your teacher's voice. The familiarity feels real because the echoes are real, stitched together into a face that never existed outside your mind. Perhaps this is the greatest paradox of all. The faces you hold closest are themselves echoes. The image of a loved one, recalled in their absence, is not them but your memory of them, a memory that changes each time it is summoned. Over years the echo grows louder than the original. The face you remember may no longer match the person you see, and in some cases, the remembered face feels more real than reality itself. So the next time you feel recognition stir in your chest as you look at a stranger, pause and consider what is happening. That warmth of familiarity is not proof of a past encounter, it is your brain replaying an echo, dragging fragments of memory into the present moment. The stranger is innocent of your recognition, it is your mind that is guilty of projection. Faces, then, are not fixed truths but resonances. They exist not as isolated images, but as echoes bouncing between memory and perception. And if every encounter is shaped by echoes, then perhaps you have never truly met anyone at all. You have only ever met the reverberations of faces past, painted over the strangers of today, ringing endlessly in the hollow chambers of your mind. Imagine two photographs of the same person, one smiling and one neutral. Now imagine cutting each photo in half, and fusing the top half of one with the bottom half of the other. At first glance, the result seems almost normal, even seamless. But stare longer, and something uncanny emerges. The features refuse to align in your perception, and the brain struggles to reconcile them. This is known as the composite face effect, one of the most fascinating demonstrations of how your brain invents faces rather than observes them. The composite face effect reveals that the brain does not process individual features, eyes, nose, mouth, in isolation. Instead, it processes the face as a holistic pattern. When two halves are misaligned, the brain cannot stop itself from merging them into a single identity. The result is confusion, distortion, and often the sense that the face is both familiar and foreign at the same time. The illusion exposes a simple but profound truth. Faces are not real objects but mental constructs, fragile mosaics woven by perception. Psychologists have used this effect to uncover the brain's peculiar biases. In experiments, participants shown composite faces consistently fail to identify the individual halves correctly. Even when told that the top belongs to one person and the bottom to another, their perception fuses them into a third, entirely new face. Recognition breaks down not because the information is unclear, but because the brain insists on wholeness. Your neurons prefer an invented identity to fragmented reality. This drive toward wholeness reveals a paradox. On the one hand, it allows you to navigate a world full of faces quickly. You don't need to analyze each feature individually. You recognize people instantly, almost automatically. But on the other hand, it means you are vulnerable to illusions. A single misalignment, a slight distortion, can trick your perception into creating faces that do not exist. You see a coherent whole where only fragments are present. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Have you ever glanced at a magazine cover where multiple faces overlap, only to see a new face flicker into existence between them? Or stared at someone across the room and thought they looked like two different people depending on the angle? These are not quirks of attention, but glimpses of the composite effect at work. Your brain is constantly stitching fragments into coherence, and sometimes the stitching goes awry, producing hybrids that flicker between recognition and strangeness. The effect also explains why faces in memory are unstable. Each time you recall someone, you are not retrieving a perfect photograph, but recombining fragments of different expressions, moments, and angles. The laugh from one encounter fuses with the gaze from another. Over time, the memory face becomes a composite, a blend of multiple versions rather than a single truth. When you picture someone you haven't seen in years, you may in fact be recalling a face that never existed outside your mind. Neuroscience supports this idea through studies of the fusiform face area and superior temporal sulcus, regions of the brain specialized for facial processing. These regions light up most strongly when presented with whole faces, not individual features. In other words, the brain privileges the gestalt, the overall form over the parts. The composite face effect arises because the system is designed to enforce unity. A half smile fused with neutral eyes becomes, for perception, a new person entirely. Identity is conjured not from reality, but from the insistence on wholeness. There is also a deeper psychological dimension. The composite effect mirrors the way we experience people themselves. Rarely do we see someone as they are in any single moment. Instead, we see a fusion of versions, the way they once laughed, the way they once scowled, the way they appear today. Each interaction layers onto the others until the person you know is not a fixed image, but a composite identity. Relationships themselves are mosaics, shaped by memory and expectation, not by unchanging truth. Dreams amplify this even further. In sleep, faces shift seamlessly between identities, as though composites are the brain's default. A friend's face may suddenly morph into a stranger's, then back again, and yet you accept it. The dream reveals what waking life conceals, that faces are never stable, only constructed. The composite face effect in experiments is simply a window into this deeper reality, that every face you know is a collage. Even art and culture seem to recognize this. Ancient masks often exaggerate features into unified expressions, stripping individuality in favor of archetypes. Modern technology, too, participates in this illusion. Consider how facial recognition software works. It does not store your exact features, but averages them into mathematical composites. The you in the database is not your true face, but a statistical approximation, a digital mask stitched together from points and probabilities. The unsettling conclusion is that every face you see is already a composite. It is built from fragments of light, memory, and projection. The illusion of stability is maintained only because your brain insists on unity. Yet unity is a lie. The face of your best friend, your parent, your lover, even your own reflection, is not singular, but multiple. It is a fusion of countless impressions recalled and reassembled each time you look. So the next time you see a face, ask yourself, is this truly them, or is it the composite your brain has created? The answer may not comfort you, but it will bring you closer to the truth that faces are not fixed realities, but echoes, collages, projections, paintings that only exist in the theater of the mind. Close your eyes and summon a face. Perhaps it is someone you love, someone you once knew, or a stranger invented by the drifting machinery of your mind. Notice how unstable it is. The eyes sharpen, then blur, the mouth shifts. Sometimes smiling, sometimes not. A detail you were sure of, hair color, the slope of the nose, changes under the pressure of focus. What you are witnessing is the same process that builds faces in dreams, not memory replayed, but fragments recombined. The unsettling truth is that this process does not stay confined to sleep. You walk through waking life, surrounded by dream faces, each projection stitched together in real time, carrying with them all the instability of the dream world. Dream researchers have long puzzled over the origin of faces in sleep. Most agree that the brain does not invent entirely new ones from nothing. Instead, it borrows, recombines, and reprojects. The stranger who greets you in a dream may have your uncle's eyes, a co-worker's chin, and the voice of someone you passed once on the subway. These hybrids feel real in the dream, but when you wake, you realize you have never actually met them. Yet the brain does not treat them as inventions. It reacts with recognition, fear, desire, or love, as though the face were genuine. Now consider this. The same neural machinery that creates dream faces is active when you are awake. The fusiform gyrus, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, all collaborate not only when you sleep, but when you glance at a stranger on the street. The difference is only context. In waking life, the projections are constrained by sensory input, light bouncing into your eyes, but the process is identical. Fragments, associations, and expectations painted into coherence. You never see faces as raw data. You see them as waking dreams. This explains why faces so often feel dreamlike. Have you ever looked at someone and thought, they don't quite look real? That uncanny sensation arises when the waking projection falters, when the coherence slips just enough to remind you of the dream world. You might notice their eyes seem misplaced, or their expression seems inconsistent with their tone. What you are really noticing is the instability of the neural painting, your brain struggling to keep the waking dream intact. Dream psychology offers another clue. Faces in dreams are often composites of memory and emotion. A friend may appear, but their features are exaggerated by how you feel about them. A loved one may shift into a stranger because your mind has fused two memories together. The same bias infiltrates waking perception. That colleague who always irritates you, do they actually have a scowl, or does your brain project it because it expects irritation? That person who comforts you, do they really smile more, or is your brain smoothing their features to match the warmth you feel? In both dream and waking, faces are not observed but sculpted by expectation. The paradox grows deeper when you realize how porous the boundary is between waking and dreaming. Sleep scientists describe hypnagogia, the state between wakefulness and sleep, where faces often appear spontaneously. Close your eyes as you drift off, and you may see flashes of faces, some familiar, some strange, some grotesque. These are not hallucinations from another world. They are projections bubbling up from the same machinery that fuels daily recognition. Your waking mind is simply catching glimpses of the dream face factory that runs at all times beneath awareness. Even culture reflects this truth. Folklore across societies is filled with stories of dream visitations, where ancestors, deities, or strangers appear vividly in sleep. But what if those dream visitors were never external beings at all? What if they were only echoes of the same waking projections, magnified by the freedom of sleep? When you dream of someone who has died, their face is not returning from beyond. It is being painted anew by neurons still clinging to memory. The dream feels sacred because it reveals how fragile and constructed faces truly are. There is also a haunting consequence. Perhaps some of the faces you remember from waking life never existed outside your dreams. Studies have shown that people sometimes falsely believe they have met someone in reality when in fact they only dreamed of them. The dream face, once painted, is added to the archive of familiarity, indistinguishable from waking encounters. Imagine how many of the faces you know are ghosts from dreams, woven into your waking world without your consent. Philosophy deepens this unease. If the waking world itself can only be known through perception, and perception is built by the same machinery as dreams, then what separates one from the other? Both are fabrications stitched from fragments, both unstable, both prone to distortion. Perhaps life itself is simply a lucid dream, and every face you meet is no more solid than those you encounter in sleep. Next time you walk through a crowded street, pause and look around. Ask yourself how many of these faces are strangers I will forget, and how many are dream echoes dressed in daylight. The answer may be indistinguishable. Your brain is not a window to the world but a dream engine, constantly painting projections across the canvas of experience. Every smile, every frown, every fleeting glance is part of a waking dream that you mistake for truth. And so the paradox sharpens. You trust the faces you see to anchor you in reality, but they may be nothing more than the same shifting phantoms that visit you in sleep. In both dream and waking, you live inside a theater of projections. The curtain never lifts. The actors never leave. The faces you encounter are always masks, flickering in and out of existence, woven not from truth but from memory and imagination. Picture a simple theatrical mask, its surface painted to resemble a smiling face. Now imagine flipping that mask, so you are staring into its hollow, concave interior. Logic says you should see an inverted face, one bending inward like a cave, and yet, when you actually look at it, something strange happens. The hollow face does not appear hollow at all. It bulges outward, still smiling, still alive, as though the mask were resisting its true shape. This is the hollow mask illusion, and it reveals one of the most unsettling truths about faces. Your brain would rather invent a lie than accept that a face could be anything other than real. Psychologists have used this illusion for decades to probe the stubbornness of facial perception. Unlike objects which you can see correctly whether convex or concave, faces are privileged in your brain. They are so important for survival, recognizing friend from foe, kin from stranger, that your visual system forces coherence upon them. Even when reality provides clear evidence of concavity, your brain flips the image into convexity, projecting a proper face onto a hollow shell. You don't see the mask as it is, you see it as your brain insists it must be. This compulsion demonstrates the predictive nature of perception. The brain does not simply record data, it predicts what should be there, and forces your awareness to conform. When confronted with a hollow face, the prediction overwhelms the raw sensory input. You are not seeing truth, you are seeing expectation. In fact, this illusion is so powerful that it persists even when you know the trick. Even when you reach out and touch the mask, your brain still insists it bulges outward. Knowing the truth does not protect you from projection. Now consider what this means for everyday encounters. If your brain can so easily transform a hollow mask into a smiling face, how often does it do the same with real people? How often does it smooth over contradictions, invent coherence where none exists, or force stability upon expressions that are fractured? When you see a loved one smile, are you truly seeing their expression, or are you seeing the projected smile your brain insists belongs there? The hollow mask illusion is not confined to theater props, it lives in every glance you cast. Clinical psychology has uncovered striking links between this illusion and the way minds diverge. People with schizophrenia, for example, are less susceptible to the hollow mask trick. Unlike neurotypical individuals, they can often see the concave mask for what it is. Researchers believe this difference arises because their brains do not impose the same rigid top-down predictions on perception. In other words, they see more of the raw data and less of the projection. But this accuracy comes at a cost. To see without projection is to live in a world that feels fragmented, unfiltered, and overwhelming. The rest of us live in illusion, not because it is true but because it is useful. The hollow mask also echoes in culture and symbolism. Masks have always carried a paradoxical weight. They conceal by revealing, the smiling mask hides the true face. But in wearing it, the actor also becomes something else entirely. The hollow mask illusion makes literal what culture has always known metaphorically, that faces are masks and masks are faces. You never really see beneath them because your brain will not let you. Dreams, too, play with this phenomenon. Dream characters often appear stable at first glance, but collapse into distortions upon closer inspection. A face may suddenly invert, blur, or flatten, yet in the dream you accept it. This mirrors the hollow mask effect. The brain insists on coherence, even if it must bend reality to achieve it. Whether asleep or awake, you live surrounded by masks, both literal and neural. There is also a deeper philosophical question hidden here. If the brain can override raw sensory input with prediction, then how much of what you call reality is simply projection? Perhaps faces are only the most obvious example. If the hollow mask can appear convex when it is concave, what about the stranger's expression across the room, or the gaze of a loved one, or even your own reflection? How many times are you seeing not what is there but what your brain demands must be there? The illusion also contains an existential paradox. The face you see on the mask is, in some sense, more real to you than the mask itself. Your neurons reject the hollow truth and construct a living lie, and that lie feels solid. Perhaps all faces are like this. Perhaps the people you love, the strangers you fear, and the face in the mirror are all hollow masks, given substance only because your brain refuses to see emptiness. The projection is not an error, it is the only way you can function. So the next time you encounter a mask, whether on a stage, in a dream, or in the expression of another person, remember the hollow mask trick. Remember that your brain will fight against emptiness, bending perception into shape, painting reality with false depth. You do not see faces as they are. You see faces as your mind needs them to be. The smile on the mask, the warmth in the eyes, the sense of identity, all of it may be hollow. And yet, because your brain insists, it feels full, undeniable, alive. There is a narrow place between comfort and horror, a psychological cliff where faces begin to betray themselves, too human to be dismissed as objects, yet not human enough to be embraced as real. This is the uncanny valley, a term coined to describe the unsettling effect of almost human faces. Robots, mannequins, hyper-realistic dolls, or even computer-generated avatars that come close to human likeness, but fall just short. When you look at them, something inside recoils. You feel the weight of familiarity, yet you cannot trust it. It is as if your brain whispers, "This is a face, but it is not alive." The uncanny valley is not just a quirk of aesthetics. It reveals something fundamental about how you perceive all faces. Your brain is constantly balancing between recognition and doubt, comfort and threat. When a face matches the patterns stored in memory, symmetry, movement, warmth, it feels safe, even inviting. But when the projection falters, when small inconsistencies accumulate, eyes too glassy, movements too stiff, expressions too delayed, the illusion begins to crack. You are left staring at a face that is both familiar and alien, and your mind cannot decide which it should trust. Psychologists suggest this unease arises because the uncanny valley exposes the fragility of projection. When you see a real human, your brain easily stitches features into a coherent whole. When you see a clearly artificial object, it relaxes, classifying it as non-human. But in the valley between, the brain struggles. It tries to project humanity onto something that almost fits but doesn't. The result is tension, a cognitive dissonance that manifests as unease. You recoil not from the object itself, but from your brain's failure to make its projection convincing. Neuroscience provides further clues. Studies using brain imaging show heightened activity in regions linked to threat detection when participants view uncanny faces. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, reacts as though danger is present. Why? One theory is evolutionary. Early humans needed to quickly distinguish between the living and the dead, between healthy kin and diseased outsiders. An almost human face may have triggered suspicion. Something is wrong here. Something is off. Be cautious. The uncanny valley may thus be a survival mechanism, encoded into perception, a defense against deception. But the uncanny valley is not confined to robots or mannequins. It shadows you in daily life. Think about those moments when someone's smile feels off, or when their expression seems forced, rehearsed, or hollow. The face is real, but your brain hesitates, caught between familiarity and doubt. You may not realize it, but you are standing at the edge of the uncanny valley, recoiling from the cracks in the projection. Even the people closest to you sometimes fall into this valley, when your expectations of their face fail to align with reality. Dreams often exaggerate this effect. Dream characters may appear almost human but subtly wrong, their eyes too large, their movements jerky, their expressions mismatched to their words. In the dream, you may accept them, but a lingering unease follows. This is the uncanny valley bleeding into your inner theater, showing you how close to collapse the face illusion truly is. Your waking brain smooths over these cracks more effectively, but the dream reminds you that the mask is fragile. Technology makes this valley more visible than ever. Digital avatars, deep fakes, and virtual reality characters push closer to realism, yet often remain unsettling. A CGI face may move with perfect skin texture and lifelike detail, but a subtle stiffness in the eyes gives it away. You recognize it as human-like, yet something in you resists. Even when technology perfects the likeness, the knowledge that it is fabricated keeps the unease alive. The uncanny valley is not just about perception but about trust. Your refusal to believe a projection, even when it looks flawless. Philosophy finds echoes here as well. Martin Heidegger once described the uncanny das Unheimliche as the moment when the familiar becomes strange. The uncanny valley is the face version of this paradox. You recoil because what should feel like home no longer does. The human face, once the anchor of recognition, becomes unstable, alien, and hollow. It is not the object that unsettles you, but the recognition that your perception is unreliable. Perhaps this is why horror movies exploit the uncanny valley so effectively. Masks that look almost human, dolls with frozen smiles, characters with exaggerated or lifeless expressions, all tap into the brain's discomfort with near faces. They force you to confront the possibility that not every face can be trusted, that the projection may betray you. But the scariest part is not the mask or the doll. It is the realization that your own mind is projecting humanity onto emptiness and failing. What does this mean for the faces you trust? If the uncanny valley teaches anything, it is that recognition is not certainty. The warmth you see in a smile, the trust in familiar eyes, the stability of loved ones, all depend on the brain's ability to maintain projection. Crack that projection, and even the dearest face could slip into strangeness. This is why grief can feel uncanny. When you see a photograph of someone gone, the face looks human, yet it no longer belongs to life. It hovers in the valley, both real and unreal, comforting and haunting at once. The unsettling truth is that every face carries within it the potential to fall into the valley. All it takes is a slight shift, a moment of stillness, a crack in the projection, and what once felt human becomes alien. You may never notice this consciously, but the discomfort lingers, a reminder that faces are not solid ground but fragile illusions. So the next time you feel that shiver of unease when looking at a doll, a robot, or even a person whose expression doesn't match their tone, remember the uncanny valley is not out there in the face you see. It is inside your brain, in the tension between projection and reality. You are recoiling, not from them but from your own awareness that faces are unstable, masks painted onto emptiness, always on the edge of collapse. Turn a face upside down. At first, it still looks like a face, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. But as you study it, something strange happens. Details slip past your notice. Expressions that should be obvious disappear. You may even fail to see distortions so grotesque they would be unmistakable if the face were upright. This is the face inversion effect, a paradox that reveals how deeply the brain depends on orientation to construct identity. Faces, it seems, are not stable objects. They are fragile projections, balanced on a knife's edge of perspective. Flip the angle, and the illusion begins to fracture. Psychologists discovered this phenomenon in the 1970s, when researchers showed participants upside-down faces and measured their ability to recognize them. The results were clear. While people could identify upside-down objects like houses or cars with relative ease, inverted faces posed a unique difficulty. Recognition slowed, accuracy plummeted, and distortions often went unnoticed. One famous example is the Thatcher illusion, in which the eyes and mouth of a face are inverted while the rest remains upright. When the face is viewed right side up, the grotesque distortion is obvious. When flipped upside down, it often looks strangely normal. The paradox is striking. The brain fails to see horror when the face is inverted, because its projection system collapses. Why does this happen? Neuroscience suggests that face perception is configural. Your brain doesn't just catalog individual features but the relationships between them. The spacing of the eyes, the alignment of the nose and mouth, the symmetry of proportions. All of these relationships create the sense of a coherent identity. When the face is upright, these relationships are processed holistically, allowing recognition to be almost instant. But when the face is upside down, the brain struggles, the holistic system falters, and the brain reverts to piecemeal analysis. You no longer see a face but a collection of mismatched parts, and the illusion of identity begins to unravel. This reveals an uncomfortable truth. Your ability to recognize faces is fragile. It depends not only on memory but on orientation, on the brain's willingness to preserve coherence. In other words, you don't actually see faces. You see the projection of relationships your brain expects. When those relationships are disrupted, the projection falls apart. What you call a face is less an image than a performance, contingent on angle and alignment. The inversion effect also sheds light on why faces are so central to human connection. Because the brain processes them holistically, they feel different from other objects, imbued with a kind of immediacy. You can glance at a face and feel recognition, emotion, even intimacy in less than a second. But that immediacy is an illusion. It is not speed born of accuracy, but of prediction. The inversion paradox exposes this by showing how easily the system collapses when disrupted. A rotated house is still a house, but a rotated face ceases to be fully human. Dreams sometimes reflect this fragility. Have you ever noticed how faces in dreams can be unstable, shifting suddenly into grotesque distortions? Sometimes they even appear upside down, yet you accept them as normal until you wake. This is the inversion effect bleeding into the dream state, your brain struggling to maintain coherence when orientation is uncertain. In waking life, the brain is better at smoothing over such distortions, but the dream reveals the instability lurking underneath. Art has long exploited this vulnerability. Surrealist painters like Salvador Dali played with inverted faces and distorted orientations to evoke discomfort. By flipping a familiar pattern, they forced viewers to confront the fragility of recognition. What once felt human becomes alien when the orientation shifts. Even children's toys and masks sometimes exploit inversion, creating faces that seem comical or eerie simply by turning features upside down. These artistic experiments remind us that identity is not inherent in the face itself but in the projection your brain imposes. Philosophically, the inversion effect suggests something even more radical. Perhaps all recognition is orientation dependent. You believe you know someone's face, but you may only know it from familiar angles, in familiar contexts. Change the conditions, rotate it, alter the lighting, distort the proportions, and recognition falters. Does this mean you ever truly know a face at all, or do you only know the narrow version your brain has rehearsed? The paradox hints that identity itself is conditional, built on context, always vulnerable to collapse. There is also a metaphorical dimension. In life, people often reveal different faces, depending on perspective. Someone may appear kind in one context, cruel in another, trustworthy in one light, deceptive in another. The inversion effect captures this truth in visual form. Change the angle, and the familiar becomes strange. You don't just fail to recognize the physical face, you fail to recognize the person. What you thought was stable identity is revealed as projection, fragile and reversible. The unsettling conclusion is this: every face you see is only real to the extent that your brain maintains the projection, rotate it, distort it, or present it out of context, and the illusion collapses. You are left not with a person but with disconnected parts, meaningless features without coherence. The face inversion paradox is not just a quirk of vision, it is a window into the instability of recognition itself. So the next time you see a photograph turned upside down, pause before flipping it back. Look closely at the face that resists recognition. Notice how the smile seems hollow, how the eyes lose their spark, how the features flatten into strangeness. Then remember, this is not a failure of the image. It is a failure of the projection. Faces are never what they are what your brain insists they must be. And when the orientation falters, the mask slips, revealing how fragile the illusion always was. Stand in the middle of a busy street. Hundreds of people pass by, faces flashing for an instant, then vanishing into the flow. You cannot hold them all. You cannot even begin to. Each one has an identity, a history, a universe of thoughts, but to you they collapse into a blur. This is the paradox of crowds, individually human, collectively faceless. The mind that can linger so intently on one beloved face becomes strangely blind when too many appear at once. In a crowd, faces dissolve, reduced to patterns and approximations. Psychologists call this phenomenon ensemble coding. Rather than process every individual face, the brain extracts averages, the general age, mood, or direction of the group. It compresses complexity into summary. You don't remember each person who brushed past you in the train station. You remember that the crowd felt rushed, anxious, or cheerful. This is efficient for survival, but devastating for individuality. The thousands of faces blur into a statistical fog. The projections remain, but they no longer belong to anyone specific. This explains why witnesses to mass events often fail to recall individual identities. Ask someone who attended a protest to describe who stood beside them, and their memory collapses into vague impressions. A man with dark hair, a woman in a red coat. The brain resists holding on to each separate face. Instead, it projects a composite crowd, a collective mask made of fragments. Recognition becomes impossible, because the faces were never stored in the first place. There is an evolutionary logic behind this blindness. In ancestral environments, faces were often encountered in small groups, family, tribe, allies. Recognizing each member was manageable, even crucial. But when strangers gathered in large numbers, individuality was less important than the collective signal. Is the group angry, calm, hostile, friendly? Survival depended less on recognizing every face than on reading the emotional weather of the crowd. And so your brain evolved to average, to project generalities, to sacrifice detail for pattern. Yet this adaptation creates strange consequences in modern life. Consider rush hour commuters on a subway train. Each is a person with a story, yet together they become background. You may look directly at them, but you do not truly see them. Your brain renders them as a faceless mass, a projection of crowd rather than people. This is why you can spend years in a city and never remember the faces of those you pass daily. The crowd consumes individuality. Philosophy lingers here too. Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, "The crowd is untruth." By this he meant that individuality dissolves when submerged in mass identity. The face, normally the anchor of personal recognition, becomes unstable in the collective. You no longer see this person, you see a type of person. A crowd is not a collection of unique beings, but a sea of projections, averaged into anonymity. In the blur of faces, reality recedes into abstraction. Dreams exaggerate this phenomenon. In dreamscapes, Crowds often appear, but their faces are indistinct, shadowy, blurred, interchangeable. They move with purpose, yet their identities remain inaccessible. The dream reveals what waking life conceals, that crowds are never truly seen. They are felt, not recognized. Your brain projects them as masses, not as humans. And when you wake, you cannot recall a single detail, only the overwhelming sense of being surrounded. Art and culture echo this blindness. Paintings of battlefields, murals of markets, photographs of protests, all often portray the crowd not as individuals, but as a textured wave. Faces blur into brushstrokes, shadows or patterns. Even filmmakers exploit this by pulling the camera back, reducing the crowd to a backdrop. Identity dissolves at scale. The focus is not on any single person, but on the overwhelming effect of many. But here is the paradox. Within the blur, some faces still catch your attention. A glance lingers. A stranger's expression feels different, distinct, sharp against the fog. Why this one? Why now? Perhaps because the brain occasionally elevates fragments from the mass, pulling one face into clarity to anchor perception. But this, too, is projection. The chosen face becomes a symbol, standing in for the crowd itself. It is not really them you see, but the role your mind assigns them. There is also a haunting consequence to this blindness. If crowds erase identity, then perhaps history itself is filled with invisible faces. Think of the photographs of migration, war, famine, masses of people, their individuality lost to the blur. The eye cannot hold them all, and so they become a faceless collective in memory. Each one was a person with a name, but in the projection of history they become the crowd. The tragedy is not only what they endured, but that their faces dissolved in perception. In your own life, this blindness repeats. You remember the intimate faces of family and friends, but what of the shopkeepers, the bus drivers, the strangers in hallways? Their faces passed through you and were forgotten. Not because they lacked value, but because your brain refused to hold them. They became part of the endless faceless crowd, ghosts who existed but were never seen. The paradox of crowds, then, is this. They surround you with faces while simultaneously erasing them. Individually, each is real, but collectively, they collapse into projection. Recognition fails not because you did not look, but because the brain cannot carry so many identities at once. It chooses efficiency over truth, averaging humanity into anonymity. So the next time you stand in a crowd, pause and look around. Try to hold the faces, even for a moment. Notice how quickly they blur, how rapidly individuality dissolves, and remember the facelessness is not in them. It is in you. Your brain, overwhelmed, has chosen projection over detail, ensemble over identity. The crowd you see is not the crowd that exists. It is only a mask painted by memory, erasing the infinite detail of the real. A smile can disarm, comfort, seduce, deceive. It is the most recognizable expression in the human repertoire, and yet it may also be the most misleading. When you see someone smile, you do not see the subtle contractions of muscle fibers or the geometry of lips. You see meaning, warmth, friendliness, approval, but this meaning is not in the face itself. It is in your projection. The truth is that smiles are masks, and your brain paints them onto others as much as it perceives them. Look closely, and you will find the paradox. Smiles can be bright, but the eyes often betray emptiness. Psychologists distinguish between two kinds of smiles. The Duchenne smile, named after neurologist Guillaume Duchenne, and the non-Duchenne smile. The Duchenne smile involves both the mouth and the eyes, with the orbicularis oculi muscles contracting to create crow's feet at the corners. It is often read as genuine joy. The non-Duchenne smile involves only the mouth, leaving the eyes untouched, a polite or forced gesture. Yet most people cannot consciously tell the difference. Your brain projects authenticity even when none exists, smoothing over the hollow smile into one that feels real. This is why people can deceive with smiles so easily. Politicians, salespeople, even strangers at parties use smiles as tools of projection. They bend their mouths into the shape of friendliness, and your brain obliges, painting warmth into their eyes whether it is there or not. But if you look long enough, if you pay attention to the gaze, unease begins to creep in. The eyes remain flat, cold, detached. The smile floats like a mask, disconnected from the soul. What you are really noticing is the failure of projection, the smile your brain insisted upon colliding with the emptiness behind the eyes. This phenomenon echoes in experiments on emotional recognition. Participants asked to judge the sincerity of smiles often rely heavily on context. The setting, the body language, the tone of voice. Stripped of these cues, they frequently misinterpret forced smiles as genuine. The projection is so strong that even minimal signals are enough to convince. You don't see the truth of the face. You see the story your brain needs to believe. Consider too how memory warps smiles. When you recall a loved one, you may picture them smiling, even if they rarely did. Your brain edits memory into warmth, projecting joy where reality may have been more neutral or even somber. In this sense, smiles become less about truth and more about emotional need. You want to remember someone fondly, so your brain paints the smile onto their face retroactively. The remembered smile is not theirs but yours. Dreams exaggerate this distortion. In dreams, smiles often appear exaggerated, stretched too wide, lingering too long. Sometimes they hover on characters whose eyes remain lifeless, creating an uncanny dissonance. These dream smiles expose what waking perception hides, that expressions can be projections pasted onto emptiness. You accept them in the dream because your brain is accustomed to doing the same in waking life. The difference is only that the cracks are more visible in sleep. Culture has long recognized the duplicity of smiles. From the painted masks of theater to the sinister grin of a trickster in folklore, the smile has always carried a double edge. It can signal joy, but it can also hide malice. Literature and art often depict characters whose smiles betray nothing of their true intentions. Shakespeare wrote of smiling villains, and countless stories hinge on the betrayal concealed behind a grin. These cultural echoes remind us that smiles are projections, not guarantees. There is also a deeper psychological layer. Humans are wired to trust smiles because they evolved as social glue. A smile signals safety, cooperation, shared emotion. To reject smiles would be to reject community itself, and so the brain errs on the side of projection, filling in sincerity even when it is absent. This bias makes life bearable but also dangerous. It allows deception to flourish. From everyday politeness to grand-scale manipulation, the empty-eyed smile persists because your brain insists on making it whole. Philosophy amplifies the paradox. If every smile is a mask, then perhaps joy itself is always mediated through illusion. You never truly see someone's happiness. You only see your projection of it. Even your own reflection smiling back in the mirror may not belong to you. It may be your brain's reconstruction, a guess at what your happiness should look like. In that sense, smiles are less about reality and more about performance, acts of the brain to stabilize social bonds. The haunting thought is this: what if you have never seen a real smile at all? What if every grin, every laugh, every fleeting expression of joy has been a projection stitched together by neurons desperate for coherence? Perhaps the warmth you feel when someone smiles at you is not their gift but your brain's illusion. The eyes may be empty, the soul unreadable, but the projection convinces you otherwise. So the next time someone smiles at you, pause for a moment. Look into their eyes. Ask yourself whether the warmth you feel is in them or in you. The smile may be nothing more than a mask your brain insists upon, a projection that covers emptiness with light. And if every smile is a mask, then perhaps every connection you have ever felt is stitched together from illusions, fragile and shimmering, carried not in the faces of others, but in the theater of your own mind. You are walking down a dimly lit street at night. In the corner of your vision, the outline of a face flickers against a wall, half-shaped by shadow. For a heartbeat, you feel sure someone is watching. You look closer, and the face dissolves. It was nothing but a pattern of light and darkness, and yet, the feeling lingers. That momentary glimpse was powerful enough to convince you, if only briefly, that a phantom was present. This is the paradox of shadows. They invite your brain to project faces where none exist, reminding you that recognition is less about reality than about expectation. Psychologists call this phenomenon face pareidolia, the tendency to see faces in random patterns, clouds, wood grain, electrical sockets, rock formations. The shadows on a curtain suddenly seem to frown. A tree stump wears a smile. Your brain conjures presence from absence, identity from coincidence. Why? Because the brain is wired to over-detect faces rather than under-detect them. In evolutionary terms, it was safer to mistake a shadow for a predator's face than to miss the real one hiding there. The cost of false recognition is embarrassment. The cost of failure could be death. But the consequence of this bias is that you live surrounded by phantom faces. Look around your own room, and you may notice them. 2 knots in wood forming eyes, a crack in the plaster forming a mouth. These projections are so automatic you rarely question them. You don't choose to see faces in shadows, your brain insists on it. The world is filled with phantoms because your perception cannot bear emptiness. Experiments confirm this compulsive projection. In studies where participants were shown random noise images, many reported seeing faint faces within the static. Brain scans revealed that the fusiform face area, the region responsible for facial recognition, lit up even when no face was present. In other words, the brain wasn't passively fooled, it actively created the illusion. It projected a face into nothingness, and that projection felt real enough to register as presence. This explains why faces in shadows can feel uncanny. The phantom is not just visual, it is emotional. Your brain attaches familiarity and intention to the projection, making the absence feel like a presence. This is why haunted houses and ghost stories so often involve faces glimpsed in windows, mirrors, or dim corners. The human mind supplies the apparition long before the supernatural needs to intervene. The ghost is not in the shadow, it is in you. Dreams deepen this tendency. In dreams, shadows often seem alive, forming faces that shift and vanish as quickly as they appear. Sometimes they linger, half-seen figures whose identities are never revealed. These dream phantoms mirror the waking experience, your brain painting presence into ambiguity. The line between perception and imagination collapses, and every shadow becomes a potential mask. When you wake, the feeling of being watched may still cling to you, as though the dream face never fully dissolved. Culture has long recognized the power of phantom faces. Ancient cave paintings often merge natural rock formations with painted lines, creating hybrid figures that seem to emerge from the stone itself. Medieval cathedrals are filled with gargoyles and grotesques, faces carved into the architecture, half shadow, half form. These images are not accidental decoration. They are acknowledgements of the brain's compulsion to see faces everywhere. The builders gave form to what shadows already suggested, solidifying projections into stone. There is also a darker dimension. Phantom faces often carry unease because they reveal the instability of recognition. If you can see a face in a shadow, how can you be sure the faces you see in people are not also projections? The line blurs the phantom in the wall, and the stranger on the street are both painted by the same machinery. Perhaps the difference is only degree, not kind. Philosophically, this leads to an unsettling thought. What if the faces you know best, the ones you love, fear, or trust, are also phantoms? What if they exist not as they are but as shadows painted by your mind? Every smile, every glance, every familiar expression could be as fleeting and insubstantial as the shadow faces on the wall. You cannot hold on to them, because they were never fully there to begin with. The phenomenon also explains why grief and longing are haunted by phantoms. People often report seeing the faces of lost loved ones in crowds, in reflections, in dreams. They glance again, and the face is gone. But the emotional weight of recognition is undeniable. The brain, desperate to restore what is missing, projects the familiar into shadows. These phantom faces are not ghosts of the departed, but ghosts of your own memory, flickering into the world before dissolving back into absence. Even in the mirror, the phantom emerges. Stare at yourself too long in dim light, and your reflection may distort into other faces, strangers, ancestors, monstrous variations of yourself. This strange face illusion shows that even your own identity can fracture into phantoms under the right conditions. The shadow face staring back at you may not be yours, but a mask projected onto emptiness, a reminder that the line between real and phantom is always porous. So the next time you glimpse a face in the corner of your eye, do not dismiss it too quickly. Do not assume it was nothing, nor assume it was real. Instead, recognize it for what it is, a projection, a phantom born of your brain's refusal to leave shadows empty. Every face you see, whether in light or in darkness, is a mask stitched together from fragments. Some belong to people, some belong to shadows, but all belong ultimately to you. Look up at the sky on a cloudy day. Shapes shift and gather. Suddenly you notice two dark circles, a curve beneath them, and for an instant you swear there is a face staring back at you. Or glance at the front of a car, its headlights and grille forming something like eyes and a mouth, and you laugh because it looks almost alive. This is pareidolia, the brain's compulsion to see faces in patterns that were never meant to hold them. Rocks, toast, tree bark, clouds, electrical outlets. Your mind projects humanity onto them all. Pareidolia is not a trivial quirk. It is the natural outcome of a perceptual system tuned to over-detect faces. From an evolutionary standpoint, the stakes were clear. Better to mistake a bush for a predator's face than to miss the predator hiding in a bush. Your brain errs on the side of false recognition, conjuring presence from randomness. It sees faces in clouds because the cost of overperception is low, while the cost of underperception is survival itself. But this adaptive bias carries strange consequences. You are never quite sure if the face you see is truly there. Studies using brain imaging show that the same neural circuitry, especially the fusiform face area, activates when people view pareidolia images as when they view actual human faces. In other words, your brain doesn't merely compare patterns to faces, it projects faces onto them, lighting up as though a real identity were present. The face in the wall is not a trick of the eye, it is a trick of the brain, indistinguishable from reality until you question it. Consider how easily this false recognition slips into daily life. You may see a stranger across a room and feel instant familiarity, only to realize, on closer inspection, that you were mistaken. Their features triggered fragments of past memories, and your brain filled in the rest. For that brief moment, they were someone you knew. Pareidolia extends beyond objects. It infiltrates human recognition, painting false identities onto strangers. This effect can be unsettling. In eyewitness testimony, for example, people often misidentify suspects, sincerely believing they have seen someone before when they have not. The brain is not lying on purpose. It is projecting. False recognition feels as real as true recognition, because the same circuitry fires. You don't doubt the face because doubt never enters the system. To see is to believe, even when what you see is your own invention. Dreams intensify this tendency. Dream characters often appear as composites, faces you recognize, even though they are impossible. Perhaps they blend your teacher's jawline, your cousin's eyes, and a celebrity's smile. You accept them without hesitation, because your brain is not wired to question faces. Recognition is automatic, and in dreams, it is even more unrestrained. Every character feels familiar, even when they never existed outside your mind. Culture has long been fascinated with pareidolia. Religious icons are sometimes discovered in natural patterns, faces of saints in wood grain, holy figures in food, even entire crowds etched in stone. Believers treat these faces as signs, as messages from beyond. But whether divine or accidental, the mechanism is the same: projection. The brain imposes identity on emptiness, and meaning follows. The significance may not come from the pattern itself, but from the human tendency to see faces wherever possible. Philosophy, too, lingers here. Pareidolia blurs the boundary between perception and imagination. If you see a face in the clouds, is that face real or imagined? The image exists in your awareness. It affects you emotionally, cognitively, but it has no independent existence outside of you. This is the same paradox that haunts all perception. Everything you see, even real faces, may be just another layer of projection. The difference between clouds and people may not be as sharp as you think. Both require your brain to invent coherence. There is also a darker side. False recognition can fracture relationships and trust. Consider Capgras delusion, where patients believe their loved ones have been replaced by imposters. Here, pareidolia's machinery malfunctions in the opposite direction, not seeing faces where there are none, but failing to believe in the authenticity of familiar faces. The paradox is striking. The same perceptual system that forces recognition in randomness can also strip recognition from reality. Both errors remind us that faces live in the mind, not in the world. Even technology reflects this truth. Facial recognition software sometimes misidentifies objects as faces, replicating the same error as the human brain. A cluster of pixels arranged vaguely like two eyes and a mouth may trigger face detected alerts, echoing pareidolia in digital form. Machines trained to see as we do inherit not only our strengths but our illusions. The ghostly faces in clouds or trees are not human hallucinations. They are systemic artifacts of recognition itself. The haunting conclusion is this: perhaps every face you see is a kind of pareidolia. Perhaps even the real faces of people are projections, stitched from fragments, imposed onto patterns of light and shadow. The only difference between a smile on a stranger's lips and a smile hidden in the knots of a wooden door may be how convincing the projection feels. Both are invented by the same circuitry. Both rely on the same compulsion to find humanity where none may exist. So the next time you notice a face in a shadow or a cloud, pause before dismissing it as a trick. Ask yourself, what makes this face less real than the ones you encounter in life? If your brain projects identity onto randomness, what stops it from projecting identity onto people too? Perhaps every face you see, beloved, feared, or forgotten, is nothing more than pareidolia carried to perfection, false recognition, dressed up as truth, the mind endlessly conjuring presence in a world that may be empty of it. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that every face around you has become a puzzle you can no longer solve. Your spouse greets you, but their features slip away as if they belong to a stranger. You walk into work, and though voices and gestures are familiar, faces refuse to anchor themselves. This is the reality of prosopagnosia, or face blindness, a neurological condition where the brain cannot reliably recognize faces, even those of family or lifelong friends. For most of us, faces are projections held together by memory and expectation. For people with face blindness, the projection collapses entirely, leaving them stranded in a world where identity drifts like smoke. Prosopagnosia can be congenital, present from birth, or acquired after brain injury or stroke. In either case, the condition highlights how fragile face perception really is. Neuroscience has traced it to dysfunction in the fusiform face area, the brain's specialized region for processing faces. When this system falters, recognition disintegrates. But the puzzle is deeper, even without damage. Our own recognition depends on the same fragile machinery. Face blindness is not a rare exception. It is a mirror showing the instability that exists in everyone. Consider how prosopagnosic individuals navigate the world. They rely on voices, body language, hairstyles, or clothing to identify others. They learn to recognize people through context rather than features. To them, the face is no longer a stable anchor. It is a mask that shifts with every encounter. Yet, isn't that what happens to all of us? Though in subtler ways. We too reconstruct faces from fragments, the way someone laughs, the tilt of their head, the sound of their voice. Face blindness only exposes what was true all along. That identity is pieced together, not given. Psychologists studying prosopagnosia often note how sufferers describe their experiences with unease. Some say it feels like walking in a world of strangers, even among loved ones. Others describe recognizing a person one moment and losing them the next, as though faces dissolve when they turn away. This dissonance reveals how much trust we place in the illusion of facial stability. When it fails, the social fabric frays. Every encounter becomes unstable, requiring constant effort, guesswork, and projection. Even memory becomes unreliable. People with prosopagnosia often report that recalling faces is impossible. They may remember facts, voices, or gestures, but the mental image of a face refuses to form. Yet in truth, isn't this also how ordinary memory works? Think of someone you haven't seen in years. Can you clearly picture their features, or do you only recall fragments, blurred impressions, emotional tones? The difference is one of degree, not of kind. Face blindness removes the illusion of certainty, but the uncertainty was always there. Dreams offer another window into the puzzle. People with prosopagnosia report that dream characters are often faceless, or that they know who someone is in a dream, without being able to see their features. But ordinary dreamers experience similar phenomena, characters whose faces shift, blur, or remain incomplete. Yet we know them anyway. The dream exposes what waking life conceals. That recognition is not visual but conceptual, a projection of identity onto fragments. Whether face-blind or not, we all carry phantom identities through our dreams. Culture reflects this paradox in stories of masks, disguises, and mistaken identities. Myths of gods appearing in human form, fairy tales of shapeshifters, plays filled with mistaken recognition, all echo the fragility of faces as anchors of identity. Prosopagnosia is the lived version of these myths. It reveals that the mask of identity is not something worn, but something created by perception itself. Lose the machinery, and the mask falls apart. There is also a philosophical implication. If people with face blindness cannot recognize even those dearest to them, what does that say about the rest of us? Perhaps we too never truly recognize anyone. We only project recognition. Your child, your partner, your parent. Do you really know their face? Or do you merely recreate it each time, trusting the projection to remain consistent? Face blindness reveals that all recognition is fragile, dependent not on truth, but on the brain's ability to sustain illusion. Technology mirrors this puzzle. Facial recognition algorithms sometimes fail spectacularly, misidentifying individuals or failing to distinguish between similar faces. These errors reflect the same vulnerabilities as human perception: biases, gaps, misprojections. The algorithm is not less accurate than you, it is accurate in the same flawed way. Both human and machine stumble, because both depend on unstable patterns, fragile connections, and the insistence that identity can be fixed. The haunting conclusion is that prosopagnosia is not merely a disorder, it is a reminder. It reminds us that the face you believe you know may be no more stable than the phantom glimpses in dreams or shadows. Everyone is, in a sense, face blind. The difference is that most of us project strongly enough to maintain the illusion of recognition, while those with prosopagnosia cannot. But the foundation is the same. Every face you see is a guess, a reconstruction, a fragile mask built on shifting memory. So the next time you look at someone you love, pause and ask yourself, do you see them, or do you see the projection your brain has woven to hold them steady? If the machinery faltered, would they vanish into strangeness? And if so, have you ever truly seen them at all? The face blindness puzzle is not confined to a few. It is the condition of being human, the fragile balancing act between perception and projection that defines every encounter. Close your eyes and try to recall the face of someone from your earliest years. A teacher from kindergarten, a neighbor you once played with, a grandparent you barely remember. At first, fragments arrive, perhaps the color of their hair, the glasses they wore, the curve of a smile, but the full face refuses to appear. It flickers, unstable, like a half-forgotten dream. This is because the faces of your childhood are not preserved whole in memory. They are reconstructed, rebuilt each time you summon them, and every reconstruction drifts further from the original. The people who shaped your early world exist now less as themselves, and more as projections, phantoms sculpted by your brain, woven from fragments of memory and imagination. Psychologists have long studied this phenomenon in autobiographical memory. Childhood memories, especially those before the age of 7, are fragile and often fragmentary. Faces are not stored as detailed images, but as associations, warmth, safety, fear, strangeness. When you try to recall your grandmother, you may not remember her precise features, but the feeling of her presence, the scent of her kitchen, the sound of her laughter, the softness of her embrace. Your brain takes these sensory fragments and paints a face onto them. What you see is not her, but your reconstruction of her. This process becomes clear when comparing memory to reality. Many people have experienced the shock of seeing an old photograph of someone they once knew well, only to realize the remembered face was wrong. The photograph shows sharper lines, different expressions, details long forgotten. Your memory had overwritten the original with approximations, replacing reality with projection. Over time, these reconstructed faces become more real to you than the actual ones ever were. Neuroscience explains this through the reconstructive nature of memory. Each time you recall a face, your brain does not pull a stored image from a vault. Instead, it rebuilds the memory using fragments distributed across different brain regions, shape from one area, color from another, emotional tone from yet another. Each recall is an act of reassembly, and each reassembly is vulnerable to distortion. By the 10th or 100th recall, the remembered face may share little with the original. The face you know is a collage that never truly existed. This explains why siblings often remember parents or relatives differently. One recalls them as warm and gentle, another as strict or cold. The features they remember may not match at all. Each sibling reconstructed the face through the filter of their own experiences, their own emotional tone. There was never one stable face, only multiple projections, each shaped by the viewer. The childhood face is not an object, but an evolving mirror. Dreams amplify this instability. People from childhood often reappear in dreams, but their faces are distorted, blurred, younger than they ever were, or shifting between versions. Yet you still know who they are. The recognition comes not from accuracy, but from the projection of memory. The dream face may bear little resemblance to the real person, but it feels true because it carries the emotional resonance you associate with them. In this sense, dream faces may be closer to the truth of memory than photographs ever are. Not the physical details, but the emotional essence. Culture is filled with echoes of reconstructed childhood faces. Writers and poets often describe the impossibility of recalling the precise features of parents or mentors long gone. They write instead of impressions, the stern gaze, the gentle smile, the looming presence. Artists attempting to paint childhood figures often admit they cannot reproduce them accurately, so they exaggerate or stylize, capturing not the face itself but the feeling of the face. These artistic reconstructions mirror the neural ones, attempts to stabilize what refuses to hold still. There is also a haunting paradox here. As time passes, the reconstructed faces may come to feel more real than the original ones. You may insist you remember your grandfather's face, but what you recall is an edited mask, shaped by decades of reassembly. In a way, you carry a stranger inside your memory, a face that no one ever truly had, and yet that stranger feels more intimately known than the real person ever did, because they exist entirely within you. Philosophers of memory have pointed to this paradox as evidence that the past is never stable. What you recall is not the past itself, but a present projection shaped by who you are now. The child's perception of a face, recalled by the adult mind, becomes filtered through years of experience, longing, and reinterpretation. The face of your childhood is less about them and more about you, your need for coherence, your hunger for connection, your fear of forgetting. Technology sometimes brings this into painful clarity. Photographs and videos can shatter the illusion of remembered faces. The smile you thought was gentle looks sharper. The eyes you remembered as kind seem distant. And yet the photograph is not absolute truth either. It is only another projection, frozen in a moment, devoid of the context that shaped the memory. The reconstructed face in your mind and the captured face in the photograph are both illusions, each incomplete, each unstable. The conclusion is unsettling. The faces of your childhood may never have existed as you remember them. They are reconstructions, shifting masks rebuilt each time you summon them, shaped less by accuracy than by emotion. The grandmother you carry in memory, the teacher you recall, the friend you once played with, these are projections as fragile and malleable as shadows. They exist not in the past but in the theater of your mind, where memory paints endlessly on the blank canvas of forgetting. So the next time you try to recall someone from your earliest years, pause and notice how the face flickers. Notice how quickly memory supplies fragments, but not wholeness. And then ask yourself, did you ever truly know their face? Or have you only ever known the reconstruction? Childhood faces are not lost. They are invented anew each time, dreamlike, unstable, shimmering illusions that remind you that even the people who shaped you may exist only as projections inside your mind. You walk into a room, and for a moment, your chest tightens. You're certain you recognize someone. Their posture, their jawline, the flicker in their eyes. It all feels familiar, and yet, when you search your memory, there is nothing. You have never met them before, or at least, that is what reason insists. The paradox is unsettling, the stranger already known. Your brain has projected familiarity onto someone you've never seen, convincing you that recognition precedes reality. Psychologists call this phenomenon false familiarity. It is the same mechanism behind déjà vu, where the present feels like repetition, even when no prior encounter exists. The brain thrives on pattern recognition, and when a new face resembles fragments of old ones, the system leaps to certainty. It tells you, I know this person. But what it knows is not them, it is the echo of others stitched onto the present. Every stranger becomes, in part, a composite of the familiar. Consider how this shapes first impressions. That person across the table in an interview may seem trustworthy, because they remind you of a favorite teacher. Another may feel unsettling because their features resemble an old rival. You are not seeing them. You are seeing a projection of familiarity, coloring perception before reality has a chance to intervene. Strangers arrive not as blank slates but as masks painted with fragments of your past. Neuroscience explains this. Through the brain's predictive coding, rather than waiting for complete information, the mind projects expectations onto partial data. Recognition happens not when details are fully processed, but when enough overlap triggers a match. The resemblance to someone in memory, an eye shape, a smile, a way of moving, activates the circuits of familiarity, and your brain fills in the rest. The stranger becomes already known because your neurons refuse to leave the canvas incomplete. But this projection can be dangerous. False familiarity can lead to misplaced trust or unjust suspicion. Eyewitness misidentifications often occur because a stranger feels familiar, even when they are innocent. People fall in love quickly, not always because of the person before them, but because the stranger resembles someone already held close in memory. Relationships, encounters, judgments, all may be guided less by reality than by echoes of those who came before. Dreams exaggerate this paradox. Dream characters often arrive with an overwhelming sense of familiarity, even when their faces are unrecognizable. You wake and realize you knew them in the dream, though you cannot say how. This is the brain's machinery of projection, running unrestrained, painting identity onto phantoms. Strangers in dreams feel known because recognition is not about truth, but about resonance. The same resonance bleeds into waking life, where strangers carry the weight of others you once knew. Culture reflects this in myths of reincarnation and eternal return. People speak of meeting someone and feeling they have known them forever, as if recognition transcended time. But perhaps the truth is simpler and stranger. Perhaps every new face feels like a return, because your brain insists on stitching the present with fragments of the past. The eternal stranger is not evidence of past lives, but of the mind's endless recycling of memory. Philosophically, this raises unsettling questions about identity itself. If every stranger is filtered through echoes of the familiar, then do you ever meet anyone as they are, or do you always meet them as projections, shadows of those you have already known? The stranger who feels kind may be wearing the borrowed mask of your friend. The stranger who unsettles you may be carrying the shadow of someone who once betrayed you. What you see is never them, it is you, refracted through memory. Even technology plays with this paradox. Consider the eerie accuracy of algorithms that suggest people you may know on social platforms. You see a stranger's profile and feel the tug of recognition, even before remembering where you may have seen them. Perhaps you passed them once, or perhaps their features resemble someone else. The digital stranger feels already known because the same bias infects your perception, familiarity projected, even when no connection exists. There is also a haunting personal dimension. Think of the faces you pass daily on buses, in cafes, on sidewalks. Most are forgotten, erased by the blur of crowds. But once in a while, one lingers. A stranger's face sticks in memory, weighted with a feeling you cannot explain. You may never see them again, but for days, their image floats inside you, as though they mattered. Perhaps it is not them but the echo they carried. Someone you once loved, someone you once feared. The stranger was not unknown at all. They were already wearing a borrowed face. The paradox, then, is this: strangers are never truly strangers. Every encounter is haunted by resemblance, by echoes of memory. The new face is never clean, it is stitched from fragments of the old. Recognition precedes reality, making the stranger both foreign and familiar, unknown and already known. So the next time you feel that jolt, that certainty that you recognize someone you've never met, pause and consider what is happening. You are not glimpsing destiny or mystery, you are glimpsing the machinery of projection. The brain insisting on coherence, refusing to leave the world unanchored. The stranger is not a stranger, they are a reflection of memory, a mask painted with echoes. And if this is true, then perhaps you have never met anyone entirely new. You have only ever met fragments of the past, disguised in the faces of the present. Look into someone's eyes for long enough, and you may feel the eerie sensation that you are staring into a mirror. Their expression reflects yours, their mood seems to echo your own. You are not just seeing them, you are seeing yourself inside them. This is not metaphor alone. Neuroscience suggests that when you look at another's face, your brain activates the same neural pathways that would fire if you were making that expression. In a very real sense, you project yourself into others. Every face you meet carries not only their identity but also your own, stitched invisibly into their features. This mechanism is called mirror neuron activation. When you see someone smile, the neurons in your brain that control smiling light up, even if you do not move your mouth. When you see sadness in their eyes, the regions that process grief in you begin to stir. Recognition is not passive, it is embodied. You do not simply observe emotion, you simulate it. But here lies the paradox. How much of what you see in another's face belongs to them, and how much is your projection of yourself? Consider how often you read expressions incorrectly. You might interpret someone's neutral look as anger or disapproval, not because they feel it, but because you do. Your own insecurities, moods, and expectations are painted onto their face. The stranger in the coffee shop doesn't scowl at you, but your projection fills their expression with judgment. The friend's silence doesn't conceal disappointment, but your own fear makes their features tighten in your perception. The self leaks outward, transforming other people's faces into mirrors. Psychological experiments reinforce this. In studies, participants asked to interpret ambiguous expressions often project their own emotional state onto them. If they are feeling anxious, neutral faces appear threatening. If they are joyful, the same faces appear kind. The faces do not change. The self does. Yet the brain insists the projection is truth, that the emotion belongs to the other. This is why two people can look at the same face and see two entirely different things. Each sees not the person but themselves refracted through the person. Dreams magnify this effect. Faces in dreams often carry your own emotions, even when they belong to others. A dream character's anger may simply be your own anger reflected back at you. A dream lover's warmth may be your own longing dressed in another's features. In sleep, the machinery of projection strips away subtlety, leaving you to face yourself in disguise. Every dream face is in some sense your own face, fragmented and redistributed. Culture has long recognized this mirroring. Proverbs speak of seeing yourself in another, and literature is full of characters who function as doubles, doppelgängers, twins, reflections. The fascination lies not in them, but in the self that appears through them. To encounter another is to encounter your own depths projected outward, to realize that every face is also a mask you wear. Philosophy pushes this further. Emmanuel Levinas argued that the face of the other is the site of ethics itself, that to encounter another face is to encounter responsibility. Yet perhaps the haunting truth is that the other's face is never entirely other. It is always contaminated by the self, blurred by projection. You see responsibility because you have painted it there. You see kindness, cruelty, longing, fear, not in them but in yourself, disguised as them. There is a personal weight to this. Think of someone you have loved deeply. Over time, their face seems to echo your own emotions back to you. When you were happy, they looked brighter. When you were lost, their face darkened. But were you really seeing them, or were you seeing yourself refracted? Perhaps the intimacy of love is less about knowing the other, and more about losing the boundary between faces. Your identity projected into theirs until you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. But the paradox cuts both ways. Just as you project yourself into others, they project themselves into you. The face they see when looking at you may not be your own. It may be their fears, their longings, their memories painted onto your features. You are never seen as you are. You are seen as a reflection of them. In this hall of mirrors, no one encounters anyone directly. We all meet only projections of ourselves in the masks of others. Even technology reveals this. Think of how filters and social media distort faces. People alter their images until they reflect not who they are, but who they wish to be seen as. Viewers then project onto those altered images, believing they see authenticity when they see only performance. The cycle repeats. Faces shaped by projection, interpreted by projection, existing only as reflections of selves. The unsettling conclusion is this: you may never have seen anyone's true face. Every encounter has been layered with your own emotions, your own projections, your own expectations. You recognize yourself in others, and call it recognition of them. Perhaps this is why humanity feels both intimate and alien. Every person you meet is both stranger and mirror. So the next time you lock eyes with someone, and feel understanding pass between you, pause and ask yourself, is it them you see, or is it yourself gazing back? The self in others is not a poetic metaphor, it is the very mechanism of recognition. Every face is a reflection, every encounter is a projection, and in this endless loop perhaps you have never truly met anyone else at all, only yourself, endlessly refracted across the masks of the world. Try to summon the image of a stranger from memory, someone you swear you've seen before, though you can't recall where. Their features seem clear at first, the hair, the eyes, the tilt of the smile. But when you focus harder, the image begins to warp, details change, the nose shifts shape, the eyebrows blur, the expression flickers between warmth and coldness. Soon you realize the truth, this person never existed at all. What you remember is not a person but a projection, a face your brain invented from fragments of others. Psychologists studying memory have uncovered this strange truth through experiments on false recognition. Participants shown thousands of faces often report recognizing new ones as familiar, even insisting with certainty that they've seen them before. Brain scans confirm that recognition areas light up, as though encountering a real memory, but these faces never existed. They were composites generated by researchers, hybrids stitched together from random features. The brain, desperate for coherence, projected identity onto patterns that carried only the illusion of familiarity. This phenomenon reveals how fragile the archive of faces truly is. You do not carry detailed portraits in your mind. You carry fragments, averages, emotional tones. When presented with something new that resembles those fragments, your brain fills in the rest. A stranger's face feels real, not because it is remembered, but because it fits the mold your neurons are primed to project. The paradox is chilling. You may be surrounded not only by strangers, but by people who feel familiar, simply because your brain has invented their existence. Dreams expose this vividly. Many dream characters are faces you believe you know, but when you wake you realize they never belonged to anyone real. They were stitched together in the moment. Your mother's jawline, a friend's eyes, a celebrity's posture, woven into a new face that felt complete. And yet, in the dream, you never doubted them. Recognition flowed instantly, even though there was nothing to recognize. The dream simply makes visible what waking life conceals, that you are constantly projecting faces that never existed. Art and culture have long reflected this uncanny truth. Folklore tells of encounters with mysterious strangers who appear familiar, guiding or haunting the hero. Novelists describe characters who seem to embody composites of people the author has known. Even religious visions often involve faces that cannot be traced to real individuals, yet feel profoundly significant. These faces carry weight, not because of their reality, but because of the brain's power to generate presence where none exists. Philosophy, too, circles this paradox. If perception is always mediated by projection, then what separates a real face from an invented one? If both are constructed by the same neural machinery, the distinction may be less solid than you imagine. A stranger's face that exists in the world, and a dream face that exists only in the mind, are processed by overlapping systems. Both feel real, both stir emotion. Perhaps the difference is not in the face itself, but in the context in which you encounter it. Technology has begun to collapse this boundary further. Artificial intelligence can now generate hyper-realistic faces of people who have never existed. They look alive, eyes glinting, hair falling naturally, smiles catching light. Yet they are digital phantoms, composites of patterns with no living counterpart. When you see these faces, your brain reacts as though they are real, because the projection machinery does not discriminate. It fills in warmth, identity, even familiarity, even though the person never walked the earth. The digital stranger is proof of the illusion. Your recognition does not depend on truth, only on projection. This leads to haunting consequences. How many of the faces you remember from childhood, from crowds, from fleeting encounters, were never real in the first place? Perhaps some are composites your brain generated, and then stitched into memory as though they belonged to someone you once knew. Your life story may be populated by ghosts, strangers who never existed but who feel as real to you as the people who did. Memory cannot tell the difference, because memory is reconstruction, not archive. Even grief can be haunted by such phantoms. People mourning loved ones sometimes recall their faces with absolute certainty, only for photographs to reveal inconsistencies. The remembered face was partly true and partly invented, a hybrid of memory and longing. Over time, the invention may become stronger than reality itself, until the loved one you remember is someone who never truly existed. But does that make them less real? Or does projection grant its own kind of reality, one rooted in the theater of the mind rather than the world? The unsettling conclusion is this: your world is populated not only by real people, but by faces that never existed, phantoms generated by neurons, composites stitched by memory, illusions carried into dreams. You cannot tell the difference, because your perception makes them feel equally alive. The stranger who lingers in your mind, the dream character you swear you knew, the face in the AI-generated portrait, all are projections as real in your experience as any living person. So the next time you feel you recognize someone without knowing why, pause and consider the possibility. Perhaps you are not remembering at all. Perhaps you are meeting a face that never existed, painted by your brain in its endless attempt to turn fragments into coherence. And if that is true, then every encounter is shadowed by phantoms, every recognition haunted by invention. Faces are not truths. They are stories your brain tells, and some of those stories belong to people who never were. When you look into someone's face, you believe you are seeing them in the present moment. Their smile, their frown, the flicker of emotion in their eyes, it all feels immediate. But in truth, you are always behind. Neuroscience reveals that perception carries a delay. The light must strike the retina, signals must travel through the optic nerve, the brain must decode and reassemble the fragments. By the time you consciously see a face, at least a few hundred milliseconds have already passed. You never meet a person as they are, you meet them as they were. Every face you encounter is a time-lagged projection, a ghost from the immediate past masquerading as the present. This temporal gap may seem trivial, but consider its implications. In those milliseconds, reality has already changed. The eyes you see may have already shifted, the smile may have already faded, the breath may have already turned. You are forever catching up, forever chasing a moving target. The person before you is never the one you believe you are looking at. They have already moved on. The face is always a memory by the time it reaches you. Psychologists illustrate this with experiments on rapid perception. Show someone a face for less than 50 milliseconds, and recognition still occurs, but delayed, hazy, incomplete. The brain insists on reconstructing, smoothing the gaps, projecting coherence even when the input is fragmented. This is how you manage to function in a world that moves faster than awareness. You never see it in real time. You see an edited replay. The paradox is simple but haunting. Every face you see is already gone. Philosophers of time have wrestled with this for centuries. Augustine spoke of the present as a slippery concept. By the time you name it, it has already become past. Modern physics confirms that simultaneity itself is relative, dependent on perspective. In this light, the face you see is always both now and not now, both present and absent. You meet people not as they exist but as echoes, flickers from the edge of memory. This time lag explains why expressions sometimes seem inconsistent. You may believe you caught someone's smirk or flash of anger, but in reality, you caught the tail end of an expression already vanishing. Your projection fills in continuity, convincing you that you saw a coherent face. But coherence is an illusion. What you see is stitched together from fragments scattered across time, smoothed into a story your brain invents. Dreams reflect this instability too. Dream characters often shift expression suddenly, without transition. One moment they smile, the next they glare. The dream exaggerates what waking life conceals, that you never truly see the moment of change. The lag ensures that transitions are always blurred, replaced by projections of continuity. The dream face is honest in its instability. The waking face only hides the same instability under the mask of temporal smoothing. There are experiments that reveal this delay more directly. In some studies, researchers use visual masking, showing an image so briefly that it is replaced before conscious awareness can register it. Yet participants still feel as though they saw something. The brain fills in the gap retroactively, creating the perception of continuity. In everyday encounters, the same process unfolds invisibly. The face you see is not what your eyes captured, but what your brain decided you must have seen a fraction of a second ago. The implications extend to memory. When you recall a face, you are not recalling the present moment, but the lagged projection you once saw. The memory is already once removed, and each recall distorts it further. This may explain why photographs sometimes unsettle us. A picture freezes the exact face in an instant, while your memory recalls the smoothed, time-lagged version. The photograph feels harsher, less alive, because it lacks the projection your brain used to fill in the gaps. Culture echoes this truth in art and literature. Poets write of faces as fleeting, expressions as vanishing before they can be held. Painters often blur or distort faces to capture motion, the instability of a moment already gone. Even cinema, with its 24 frames per second, acknowledges the lag. What you see on screen is not continuous motion, but a series of stills stitched into coherence. Every face, whether in life or art, is a projection caught in the delay between reality and recognition. Philosophically, the time lag confronts you with a radical question. If you never see anyone as they are in the present, do you ever truly see them at all? The face of your child, your lover, your friend, always a fraction behind, always already past. Connection feels immediate, but immediacy is impossible. You live surrounded by ghosts, interacting not with people as they are but with projections of who they were milliseconds ago. And yet, perhaps this lag is what makes intimacy possible. If you were to see every micro-expression in perfect real time, every flicker of emotion, every unstable transition, perhaps faces would be overwhelming. The lag smooths the chaos, giving you a mask stable enough to hold on to. The delay is not a flaw, but a necessary illusion. To see others even slightly as they are, requires you to see them as they were. So the next time you look into someone's eyes and feel that you are present with them in the moment, remember, you are already behind. What you see has already slipped into the past, and your brain has painted over the cracks to convince you it is now. Every face is a time-lagged illusion, a projection masquerading as presence, and in that haunting gap lies the unsettling truth. You have never truly seen anyone in real time. You have only ever seen the ghosts they leave behind. Think of the last time you posed for a photograph. You lifted the corners of your mouth, widened your eyes, tilted your head just slightly, all in an instant. But was that truly your face, or was it a performance? Most expressions you make are not spontaneous eruptions of emotion. They are rehearsed gestures, practiced unconsciously over years, until they have become masks you wear without thinking. This is the paradox of faces. What feels authentic is often repetition. Every smile, every frown, every flicker of curiosity may be less about the present moment and more about the loop of expressions your brain has practiced and projected countless times before. Psychologists studying social interaction have long noted this cycle. When children grow up, they imitate the expressions of parents, siblings, or friends. These imitations become habits. Later, as adults, they deploy the same expressions in similar contexts, looping the performance endlessly. The smile you wear at work, the sympathetic tilt of the head when listening, the raised eyebrows of surprise, none are born new each time. They are stored scripts, triggered and replayed. In this sense, faces are not windows to the soul but archives of rehearsed gestures. Consider the Duchenne smile, often cited as the mark of genuine joy, because it engages both the mouth and the eyes. Studies show that many people learn to mimic even this supposedly authentic expression. Actors, salespeople, and skilled deceivers can rehearse it so well that it passes as real. Your brain, primed to project sincerity, accepts it, but whether genuine or rehearsed, the effect on perception is the same. You believe the mask, the loop of performance merges with projection, and authenticity dissolves. This loop shapes not only how you present yourself, but how you perceive others. Think of how often you assume someone is kind because they look kind, or suspicious because they look untrustworthy. What you are reading is not truth, but practiced expression. A politician who has rehearsed warmth for decades wears it so well that your brain projects sincerity. A rival who carries the echo of a scowl may trigger suspicion, even if they mean no harm. You are not seeing their inner self. You are seeing the loop of faces they have rehearsed into habit. Neuroscience supports this through studies of facial feedback. When you repeatedly make an expression, your brain begins to associate the muscle patterns with emotional states. Smiling, even when forced, can make you feel slightly happier. Frowning can induce a sense of tension. Over time, the loop becomes self-reinforcing. The rehearsed expression feels natural, and the natural expression feels rehearsed. Where does authenticity end and projection begin? Perhaps they were never separate at all. Dreams expose this in strange ways. Dream characters often wear exaggerated, almost theatrical expressions. They grin too widely, scowl too sharply, hold an emotion too long. These faces feel uncanny because they reveal the artificiality of expression loops. The dream exaggerates what waking life conceals. That much of what you see on faces is performance, rehearsed and replayed, stitched into the projection of identity. Culture reflects this awareness. Theater masks, from Greek tragedy to Japanese no, symbolize not the concealment of the self, but the repetition of archetypes. The actor behind the mask is secondary. The mask itself carries the role. Similarly, in modern life, faces function as social masks, rehearsed until they feel inseparable from the self. We wear expressions like roles in a play, forgetting that the loop is not who we are but what we have practiced. Philosophy lingers here as well. Irving Goffman, in The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, argued that all social interaction is performance. The face is not a revelation of inner essence, but a stage prop, adjusted for audience and context. When you smile politely at a stranger, frown at an insult, or raise your eyebrows in surprise, you are not expressing pure emotion. You are performing a script. The other accepts it because their brain projects authenticity onto it. Two performances meet, and together they weave the illusion of genuine connection. This creates a haunting paradox in intimacy. Lovers, friends, families, all rely on expressions to communicate care, joy, or sorrow. But how much of what they see is real, and how much is the loop? If your partner comforts you with a sympathetic gaze, is it a true reflection of their soul, or the practiced mask of empathy they've worn since childhood? And does the distinction even matter if the projection convinces you? Perhaps authenticity itself is only the most convincing performance. Technology now amplifies this loop. Social media platforms are filled with curated expressions, smiles, poses, crafted performances designed to appear effortless. The more these expressions are repeated, the more natural they seem, until the line between genuine emotion and rehearsed gesture disappears. You scroll through endless faces, all wearing masks so polished that they feel authentic, even though they are products of rehearsal. In this way, the digital world magnifies the loop until it becomes the dominant form of recognition. The unsettling conclusion is this: perhaps you have never seen an unrehearsed face. Every expression you encounter has been practiced, shaped by years of repetition, hardened into habit. Even your own reflection may be nothing more than the mask you've trained yourself to wear. The authenticity you trust is inseparable from performance, and performance is inseparable from projection. So the next time you smile, pause and ask, is this joy, or is this the echo of 1,000 rehearsed smiles? When you see someone's eyes widen in surprise, is it truth, or is it the mask they have practiced so well, it feels natural? The rehearsed expression loop is not a flaw in human connection. It is the very fabric of it. Every face is a performance. Every recognition is an act of belief. And in this endless cycle of rehearsal and projection, perhaps no one has ever truly shown their face at all. Imagine meeting someone who seems strangely inconsistent. In one moment, they appear confident, charismatic, perfectly composed. In another, they seem awkward, anxious, almost unrecognizable, which is their true face. Your brain insists there must be a stable identity beneath these shifting masks, yet all you encounter are fractured projections. The paradox is not that people deceive you, but that their identity itself may be unstable, existing only as a patchwork of performances your brain stitches together into something coherent. Psychologists describe this through the lens of self-discrepancy theory. We all carry multiple versions of ourselves: the ideal self we aspire to, the ought self demanded by society, and the actual self we inhabit day to day. These identities rarely align. Instead, they fracture, producing different expressions depending on context. At work, you wear the face of competence. At home, perhaps exhaustion. With friends, humor. Alone, uncertainty. Each face is real in its moment, but none is the complete you. Neuroscience sharpens the paradox. Studies show that facial recognition relies on distributed networks of the brain, not a single unified processor. These networks can activate differently depending on emotional state, context, or memory. In other words, the you that someone perceives is contingent on which neural pathways fire during the encounter. One person may consistently project warmth, another may project suspicion. Your brain fills in the gaps, believing it has seen a unified self, when in reality it has only glimpsed fragments. History reveals how cultures have long wrestled with fractured identities. In ancient Rome, the word persona referred to the mask worn by actors in the theater. Later, it came to mean the roles people play in society. Carl Jung revived the term in psychology, arguing that the persona is the mask we present to the world, concealing the more complex psyche beneath. But if every face is a projection, and every projection is fractured, perhaps there is no stable core beneath the mask. The mask itself is the identity. Consider the experience of dissociative identity disorder, where multiple distinct identities can inhabit a single body. Each identity carries its own expressions, mannerisms, even facial gestures. For outsiders, this is shocking. How can the same face project entirely different selves? Yet, in a subtler way, all of us experience this fracture. You are not the same person in every situation. Your expressions fracture into roles, and your brain projects coherence where none exists. The digital age magnifies this fracturing. Online, you may maintain several versions of yourself: the professional face on LinkedIn, the curated happiness on Instagram, the argumentative mask on Twitter, the private expressions in intimate messages. Each of these faces is real, yet none is the whole. When others encounter you, they see only the projection they interact with. In this way, your identity is not unified, but fractured across platforms, contexts, and perceptions. And still, every observer insists they know the real you. Dreams also expose the fracture. In dreams, faces often shift fluidly. One moment a friend, the next a stranger, then a parent, then yourself. The dream does not preserve stable identity, but weaves fragments into shifting projections. You wake unsettled, but perhaps it is not the dream that is strange. Perhaps waking life is the dream, and your brain is constantly stitching fractured projections into a fragile illusion of coherence. Philosophically, this raises a disturbing question. If identity is fractured, what is the self? David Hume once argued that the self is not a substance but a bundle of perceptions, fleeting and disjointed. Modern neuroscience echoes this. The self may be no more than a narrative, a projection that binds fragments together into something we can bear. Faces serve as the canvas for this projection, offering others the illusion of stability. In social life, the cost of fractured projections is both freedom and alienation. You can reinvent yourself endlessly, performing new identities through new expressions. Yet this very fluidity breeds a haunting sense of disconnection. Do others ever know you, or do they only know fragments projected through the faces you wear? Worse, do you even know yourself? Or are you merely piecing together fragments of your own reflection, mistaking the patchwork for a whole? Art captures this fracture vividly. Think of Picasso's Cubist portraits, where faces appear shattered into multiple perspectives at once. These works disturb because they reveal a truth we prefer to ignore, that identity is not singular, but splintered. And every face you see is a projection fractured across time, memory, and perception. The painting feels unsettling precisely because it refuses the illusion of wholeness. The loop completes when you realize this paradox extends to every interaction. When you greet someone, you are not seeing their essence, but the fragment they project in that moment. Later, when you recall the encounter, your brain reconstructs a stable version of them, smoothing the fractures into continuity. But this stability is false. It is the brain's desperate attempt to resist the abyss of fragmentation. The truth is that faces are shifting mosaics, projected fragments held together only by belief. So when you look at someone you love, understand the depth of the paradox. You love not a unified person, but a fractured set of projections, the smile they rehearse in comfort, the furrow of their brow in anger, the softness of their gaze in quiet moments. These fragments coalesce into the illusion of a single face, a single identity, but beneath the illusion lies only fracture, endless and unresolvable. The haunting thought is this: if identity is fractured, then so is love, trust, memory, even selfhood. What you cling to as whole may be nothing more than your brain's projection, smoothing over the cracks of reality. Every face is fractured, every identity is incomplete. And yet, it is this very incompleteness that makes human connection possible. We are mosaics meeting mosaics, fragments reflecting fragments, illusions sustaining illusions. The self is not broken. It was never whole to begin with. You walk through a crowded street and suddenly freeze. Across the way, you see a face that looks exactly like your own. The same jawline, the same eyes, the same slight tilt of the head. For a moment, time fractures. Are you looking at another person, or at yourself projected outward? This is the Doppelgänger illusion, a paradox that haunts psychology, folklore, and philosophy alike. In myth, meeting your doppelganger was an omen of death. Ancient cultures feared the double as a disruption of reality, a sign that the boundary between self and other had dissolved. But modern science approaches it differently. Neurologists describe autoscopic hallucinations, where the brain projects a full double of the self into external space. Patients report seeing themselves from outside their body, complete with facial features and gestures, as if the self had been duplicated and cast into the world. The paradox arises because the brain evolved to detect faces with astonishing precision. Facial recognition is so fundamental that it can misfire, seeing identity where none exists. In rare cases, neural disturbances in the temporoparietal junction, the brain's hub for integrating self-location and perspective, can produce the eerie impression of another you standing nearby. The face you see is your own, yet the presence feels alien, threatening, impossible. This illusion reveals something profound. The self is not anchored. If your brain can project your face outward, making you believe you inhabit two bodies at once, then identity itself is unstable. You do not simply have a face. You are the face your brain projects at any given moment. And if that projection can be doubled, then what is the original? Psychology documents cases of Capgras syndrome, where patients believe loved ones have been replaced by imposters. The faces look identical, but the emotional recognition is absent. Inversely, the Doppelgänger illusion produces a reverse paradox. The face is identical and emotionally resonant, yet the mind insists it cannot be the same person. The brain oscillates between recognition and denial, revealing how fragile our certainty of identity truly is. Dreams magnify the strangeness. Many report encountering doubles of themselves in dreamscapes, watching themselves from across the room, arguing with themselves, or observing their own death. In these moments, the dream insists that the self can be split into observer and observed, face and reflection, identity and projection. You wake unsettled, realizing that your brain does not require external reality to fracture you into two. The projection lives within. Culturally, we are fascinated by doubles. Literature overflows with them. Dostoevsky's The Double, Poe's William Wilson, Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. In each story, the double embodies repressed truths, desires, guilt, mortality, that the conscious self refuses to acknowledge. The face of the double is terrifying, not because it is unfamiliar, but because it is too familiar, holding up a mirror to what we deny. Even in modern times, people report uncanny encounters. You may stumble across a stranger online whose photo looks eerily like yours, sparking both curiosity and dread. Genetic coincidence explains resemblance, but the emotional weight comes from deeper places. Your brain whispers, what if identity is not unique? What if faces are not individual but endlessly recycled patterns, projected again and again across humanity? Philosophers seize on this, to ask if you met your double, what would distinguish you from them? If they carry your face, your mannerisms, even your memories, is the difference between you merely one of perspective? Derek Parfit's thought experiments on identity suggest that personal survival may not be about an indivisible self, but about psychological continuity. If your face and memories were copied into another body, would that still be you? The Doppelgänger Illusion is this paradox enacted in living vision. Art captures this terror. Consider Magritte's painting Not to be Reproduced, where a man stands before a mirror, yet the reflection shows only the back of his head. The face is missing, doubled in reverse, denying the viewer the reassurance of recognition. It reminds us that seeing the self outside the self disrupts the fragile projection that keeps identity whole. Neuroscience adds another layer. When you see a stranger who resembles you, mirror neurons may activate as if you're watching yourself. Your brain does not fully separate self from other, projection from reality. In that moment, you are doubled, both subject and object, perceiver and perceived. The illusion is not rare, it is simply magnified in uncanny circumstances. The loop tightens when you realize that everyone you meet is, in some sense, a doppelganger. They are not the actual person, but your brain's projection of them, assembled from memory, bias, and expectation. Their real face is inaccessible. You see only the version your mind fabricates. Thus, every encounter is an encounter with a double, an image conjured inside your head. The difference between stranger and self collapses. You are surrounded by echoes of yourself, masked as others. In this way, the doppelganger illusion is not a rare hallucination, but the fundamental condition of perception. You are always doubled. One self living inside, another projected outward into the faces you recognize. The horror of meeting your exact double is not that it is impossible, but that it exposes what is always happening. Your identity was never singular. And so the question lingers, if the self can be projected, split, and duplicated, what makes you unique? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps every face you see, even your own in the mirror, is a projection stitched together by your brain to ward off the abyss of emptiness. The double is not an intruder. The double is the truth. You are always both self and reflection, original and copy, real and illusion. You stare at your screen, scrolling endlessly. Each face that flashes before you, on social media, in films, on video calls, is not a physical presence, but a projection of pixels, a digital mask carried into your brain. Yet you respond to them as if they are real. You smile back, you feel emotions, you form memories. But what are these faces really? Nothing more than light arranged in patterns, flickering on a surface, and still your brain accepts them, stores them, and replays them as though they had once stood before you. This is the paradox of digital faces in the mind, illusions that become part of your very identity. When you dream tonight, you might see the face of an actor you've never met or a stranger who appeared once in your feed. They slip into your unconscious like unwelcome guests. They mingle with friends and family in your memory palace, treated as equals by the machinery of recognition. Neuroscience shows that your brain doesn't discriminate much between direct perception and mediated imagery. The fusiform face area fires up whether you look at a person in real life or watch their video on a phone. To the mind, both are real encounters. This explains why you can fall in love with a celebrity, fear a villain on screen, or feel grief for someone you've never met. The projection has already been accepted. But here lies the deeper twist. Digital faces are curated. Unlike waking life, where faces change with age, weather, or mood, the digital realm often presents perfected masks. Filters smooth imperfections, lighting flatters contours, algorithms push the most symmetrical and appealing visages to the top of your feed. Your brain evolved to find meaning in natural imperfection, suddenly gorges on artificial perfection. The result is distortion. Your sense of beauty, trustworthiness, and even normality is reshaped by endless digital exposure. Psychologists call this the mere exposure effect. The more you see a face, the more familiar and likable it becomes. On the internet, this effect multiplies. Influencers' faces, actors' faces, strangers' faces are presented again and again until they carve grooves into your memory. Soon, a digital stranger feels more familiar than your next-door neighbor. Familiarity is mistaken for intimacy, and projection solidifies into illusion. Philosophers take it further. If the majority of faces you interact with daily are digital, then your face world is not populated by people at all, but by simulations. Your brain's social reality is made of projections twice removed, first from the person to the screen, and then from the screen to your mind. You are living not among faces, but among their echoes. The uncanny rises when digital manipulation enters the equation. Deep fakes, filters, and AI-generated faces blur the line between the possible and the impossible. Entire faces are fabricated from scratch, belonging to no one yet looking as real as any human. The website, "This person does not exist," generates endless faces that fool recognition systems and your own mind. Stare long enough, and you feel the pull of projection, the instinctive belief, this is someone real, but it is not. It is the brain, desperate to make meaning out of nothing, assigning reality where there is only noise. Dream researchers suggest that digital faces are already bleeding into unconscious life. Reported dreams now often contain celebrities, influencers, or even AI avatars, faces absorbed through constant scrolling. The dreaming mind does not distinguish between lived encounters and digital ones. A pixelated projection becomes just as valid a memory as a childhood friend. The library of faces in your head expands endlessly, many of them belonging to no one. Consider the consequences. If every face is already your brain's projection, then digital faces reveal the projection openly. They are masks you accept, despite knowing they are artificial. Yet your emotional system still responds. You feel attraction, fear, longing. You even project inner qualities onto a stranger's image, assigning them personalities they do not possess. The face becomes a mirror of your own expectations, not a reflection of the other. This is why digital fame feels so paradoxical. A person with millions of followers is not known by millions. They are projected upon millions of times. Each follower creates their own imagined version of the influencer, filling in the gaps with personal biases. No two followers see the same person. The digital face is not singular but infinite, fracturing into countless versions inside countless minds. And then comes the recursive loop. When you look into a digital face, you are not seeing them. You are seeing your brain's best guess, influenced by memory, emotion, and bias. But when they post again, they too are shaped by projections, filters, edits, curated moments. Their digital face was already a projection before you added your own. What you see is a projection of a projection. This realization destabilizes your sense of reality. If so much of your daily life is mediated through digital faces, Zoom calls, selfies, avatars, then how much of your perception of others is grounded at all? You are always responding to masks, sometimes natural, sometimes artificial, but always projections. The digital world doesn't create the illusion. It reveals it, exaggerates it, and makes it unavoidable. Picture yourself scrolling late at night. Exhausted, faces flash by, half remembered, half invented. Some belong to people who exist. Some belong to people who don't, but your brain cannot tell the difference. Each is stored as a valid entry in the endless gallery of your mind. Tomorrow in a dream, you will meet one of them. You will know them, even if they were never real. And so the paradox of digital faces becomes clear. Every face is a ghost, and every ghost is treated as flesh. The projection continues, indifferent to origin, indifferent to authenticity. Whether born of bone and skin or pixels and code, the face is never outside of your mind. It has always been inside, waiting to be recognized. You drift into sleep and step into a world where faces are no longer anchored. A friend approaches you, their voice familiar, their mannerisms unchanged, but the face is wrong. It shifts mid-sentence, morphing into a stranger's, then another, sometimes even your own. In dreams, identity is fluid, a deck of shuffled faces dealt by the brain with careless precision. This is face swapping in dreams, a phenomenon that reveals how fragile and malleable the concept of a stable face truly is. The paradox begins with memory. Neuroscience tells us that your brain stores fragments of faces, an eye shape here, a smile curve there, like scattered puzzle pieces. In waking life, it assembles them into coherent wholes, allowing you to recognize the familiar and identify the new. But in dreams, that mechanism breaks loose. The brain becomes a surreal artist, stitching together features without consistency, splicing identities into hybrids that flicker like unstable signals. Psychologists studying dream reports find that faces often resist definition. People claim they know who they are speaking to in a dream, even if the face is blurred, shifting, or nonsensical. Recognition arises not from visual detail but from context and narrative. The person is identified not by the stability of their features, but by the brain's insistence: this is your mother, this is your friend, this is your younger self. The face is just an afterthought, projected on the fly. This reveals something unsettling. Perhaps even in waking life, we don't truly see faces, we infer them. We impose identity on a blur of sensory data. The dream simply exposes the scaffolding, showing you how easily the mask can be swapped without losing the sense of who the other is supposed to be. In some dreams, the effect is comic. Your teacher suddenly has the face of a celebrity, or your sibling morphs into a cartoon character mid-conversation. But in others, it becomes uncanny. You look into someone's eyes and see your own face staring back, lips moving in words you didn't speak. The dream does not hesitate to fracture you, making you both subject and object, actor and mask. The face is no longer your anchor of identity, it is a prop in the theater of the mind. The neuroscientific angle deepens the paradox. The fusiform face area, located in the temporal lobe, is the brain's specialist for face recognition. But in dreams, activity in this region seems to misfire, blending with memory and imagination. Instead of anchoring you to stable identities, it creates kaleidoscopic faces that refuse to stay fixed. The system designed for recognition becomes a machine for distortion. Experiments with lucid dreamers, people who can control aspects of their dreams, show fascinating patterns. Some report deliberately changing the faces of dream characters, as if sculpting identity out of clay. Others say the faces shift against their will, resisting their attempts at stability. It is as though the dream is reminding them, identity is not yours to hold on to. It belongs to the flux of projection. Philosophers seize on this strangeness. If you can recognize a loved one without their face, then what exactly is identity? If a stranger can wear your own features in a dream, does that dilute the uniqueness of your face in waking life? Perhaps identity is not grounded in physical appearance at all, but in a fragile narrative coherence, one your brain writes and rewrites endlessly, even while you sleep. The cultural imagination has long drawn on this dreamlike instability. Myths are filled with gods and tricksters, who borrow faces, who appear in guises to test mortals or confuse enemies. Shakespeare played with this in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where characters are enchanted into desiring the wrong partners, as if their faces had been swapped by magic. Even horror films exploit it. Imagine waking to find the face beside you has shifted into something else entirely. The terror works because it mirrors what your dreaming brain does naturally. Modern technology provides a strange echo of this dream phenomenon. Deepfake software can swap faces in videos with eerie precision, blurring the line between real and artificial. Watching one feels uncanny, like seeing a dream bleed into waking life. The technology doesn't invent this illusion. It simply automates what your brain already does each night. In a sense, deepfakes are digital dreams made visible. The paradox circles back to waking perception. If your brain can accept identity without a stable face in dreams, then what about waking life? How much of the face you see is memory, context, and projection rather than objective reality? Perhaps your recognition of others is not rooted in the features themselves, but in the story you tell yourself about who they are. Dreams reveal the cracks in this system, showing you the projection more nakedly. Imagine standing in a dream crowd where every face shifts with each glance. For a moment you might panic, searching for someone solid, but then the deeper realization arrives. This is how it always is. The faces you see in waking life are just more stable projections, anchored by routine rather than chaos. They are still stories your brain tells. And then comes the recursive twist. If dreams swap faces without hesitation, what stops waking reality from doing the same? What if every time you meet someone, your brain has already swapped their face for one it fabricated, an easier, more recognizable mask stitched from memory? The dream becomes not a distortion, but a revelation of the truth. Identity is projection, and the face is the least reliable of anchors. In this way, face swapping in dreams does not belong only to the night. It is the continuation of what perception always was: fluid, unstable, dependent on memory and context. Dreams merely strip away the illusion of solidity, and when you wake, you carry the silent knowledge with you. Every face is already a mask, every identity a shifting projection. Every time you look into a face, there is something quietly watching from behind. Not just you, the observer, but the sense of an observer within the face itself. It is as though behind the eyes of the other lies a presence peering back, one that you can never fully confirm, yet one you always assume. This assumption, fragile and unexamined, forms the basis of human connection. And yet, neuroscience reminds us that the observer you believe in behind every face is a projection of your own mind, a model it generates to make sense of consciousness in others. Mirror neurons play a central role here. When you see someone smile, your brain activates the same circuits involved in smiling. When you watch a grimace of pain, your own pain circuits light up. In this way, you don't just perceive an expression, you simulate it. You become the other, briefly. And from this embodied simulation arises the illusion. There is someone behind that face. But strictly speaking, you never see the observer. You only see the surface and fill in the rest with your own neural echo. Philosophers call this the problem of other minds. How do you know that the being before you has an inner world like yours? You can never open their skull and peer into their experience. Yet you assume it constantly, because to do otherwise would collapse the possibility of society. Every face becomes a proxy, a placeholder for an inner observer you project. Without that projection, trust would vanish, empathy would erode, and the human world would dissolve into suspicion. Experiments with androids and artificial intelligence highlight this paradox. When a robot is given a human-like face, people tend to attribute inner states to it, even when they know it is a machine. A slight tilt of the head, a blink, a smile. Suddenly you feel as though something is inside the face, looking back. But is it? Or is it only your brain, desperate to complete the pattern? The observer you perceive is yours, not theirs. Now imagine the reverse. When you look into a face that truly has consciousness, how do you know? A sociopath may mimic emotion with skill, their eyes calm even when inner storms rage. An actor may cry on cue, convincing you of an inner suffering that does not exist. In both cases, your projection fills the gap. You supply the observer whether it is there or not. The paradox is that you can never step outside this loop. Eastern philosophy has long questioned the stability of the observer itself. The Buddhist doctrine of anatta, or no self, suggests that even within your own face there may be no enduring observer, only passing processes, sensations and thoughts that give the illusion of someone looking out. If this is true, then the faces you project observers onto are doubly illusory. Not only do you create their inner witness, but yours is itself a projection, a story your brain tells about its own activity. Think of the recursive loop this creates. You see a face, and imagine an observer within it, but that imagined observer is generated by your own observer, which itself may be nothing more than a mental construction. Two illusions gazing at each other, each convinced of the other's reality. When you lock eyes with someone, perhaps it is not consciousness meeting consciousness, but projections meeting projections. This becomes starkly visible in the phenomenon of the gaze. When someone looks directly at you, you feel exposed. Their eyes seem to pierce you, to carry an intention. But scientifically, eyes are just orbs reflecting light. The intention you feel is your brain's invention, attributing agency behind the face. You don't just see eyes, you see the ghost of an observer behind them. The haunting part is that they are doing the same to you. Dreams often exaggerate this. In dreams, faces sometimes stare too intently, their gaze is unnerving, as if the dream characters are more aware of you than you are of them. Psychologists suggest this may reflect the brain's modeling of the observer itself, your awareness caught in a feedback loop, turning inward. The face in the dream is your own observer, externalized and reflected back at you. Consider also the spiritual interpretations. Mystics across traditions have reported moments of looking into another's face and seeing the divine. They describe the sense that behind every face there is the same universal observer, a single consciousness wearing countless masks. This collapses the distinction between self and other, suggesting that all projections converge on one source. But whether you call it God, Brahman, or universal mind, it remains unfalsifiable, a projection layered upon projection. In modern life, the paradox continues in digital encounters. A profile picture, a video call, even a comment online, all spark the sense of an observer behind the words or image. You attribute intention, emotion, and meaning. Yet behind some of those faces, there may be nothing at all. Bots, AI-generated avatars, fabricated personas, and still, your brain insists, someone is there. The observer persists, conjured from nothing. But pause and reflect. When you look into the mirror, who is the observer behind your own face? Neuroscience might say it is no one, just cortical processes giving rise to the illusion of a self. Yet phenomenology insists that you feel like an observer. You feel like someone. This tension cannot be resolved. You are both the face and the projection of the observer behind it. You are both the illusion and the one who believes it. And so, when you look into the eyes of another, you are never really seeing them. You are seeing your own mind's invention, an observer projected behind their face, an inner world imagined from the outside. They do the same to you, and the human drama unfolds as two projections nodding to each other, convinced of the reality of what they see. The paradox is haunting. Perhaps there are no true observers at all, only faces, only projections, only illusions layered upon illusions. Yet without this fragile fiction, the world of faces would collapse. Society itself depends on your brain's unwavering belief that every face hides a conscious witness. And maybe, just maybe, what watches behind every face is not theirs, not yours, but something else entirely, an infinite observer, forever reflected through the masks of flesh and dream. Stand before two mirrors facing one another, and your image stretches into infinity. Each reflection contains another, and another, fading into the distance. At first it feels simple, a neat optical trick, but linger too long, and you realize the unsettling truth. Every face in that endless corridor is you, yet none of them are real. The illusion of infinity arises from repetition, not substance, and perhaps every face you see in the world is just another reflection of yourself, projected outward by the mind, repeated across countless strangers until you mistake the mirror for reality. Neuroscience suggests that recognition is never pure. When you see a face, your brain consults its archive of stored templates, blending memory with perception. You don't really see a new person. You see fragments of old ones, stitched together into a plausible whole. That means each encounter is like a mirror reflecting pieces of you. Your mother's eyes, a friend's smile, an enemy's glare. The stranger becomes a collage of your past, a living reflection of memory's hall of mirrors. Psychologists studying projection emphasize how much of yourself you place into others. Your fears, your hopes, your hidden insecurities, they all find expression in the faces around you. A neutral glance becomes judgmental because you fear rejection. A polite smile feels romantic because you crave affection. The other person's face is just a screen, and your mind projects its film upon it. This means every reflection of them is really a fragment of you, endlessly repeated. Now, recall the phenomenon of déjà vu. You meet someone and feel an uncanny familiarity, as if you've seen them before. Perhaps you have not. Perhaps your brain is simply recycling familiar facial fragments and looping them back to you. The infinite reflections of your own memory give you the illusion of knowing the other, when in truth you are only recognizing yourself. In art and literature, mirrors have always symbolized identity's instability. Narcissus fell in love with his reflection, unable to distinguish self from other. Borges wrote of infinite mirrors as metaphors for eternity, for selfhood multiplying until it dissolves. And you, staring at countless faces, might be Narcissus in disguise, captivated not by others, but by the reflections of yourself that you misrecognize as the world. Consider the strange power of twin studies. Identical twins often report uncanny experiences of seeing themselves in the other. When they gaze into one another's eyes, the sense of identity can blur. Who is who? Where does one end and the other begin? But isn't this just an exaggerated version of what you experience daily? Each time you recognize a feature in another, you see yourself, split into fragments and scattered across the crowd. The infinite reflections are already at work, even if you don't notice. There is also the recursive paradox of observation. You see another's face and imagine an inner observer behind it. But that inner observer is also imagining you, and within that imagination, another reflection of you exists, which contains yet another imagined observer. The loop spirals endlessly, like facing mirrors. Who, then, is the original? Who is the first observer? The answer dissolves. There is no first, only infinite reflections, each depending on the other. Technology has made this literal. Video calls often show your own face alongside the others. You speak, but half your attention remains fixed on your own reflection. You smile at them while also adjusting yourself. Two mirrors open, one outward, one inward, multiplying until you can no longer tell which expression is genuine. Are you performing for them, or for yourself? In that moment, the infinite reflections are not metaphor. They are reality, visible on the screen. Dreams amplify this as well. Faces in dreams often morph, shifting from one identity to another. A lover becomes a stranger becomes your childhood friend. Each transition is seamless because the brain has no anchor, only recycled reflections from memory. The infinite hall of faces is projected without limit. You believe in each one as it appears, until it dissolves into another. The dream is a mirror that never stops multiplying. And then there is the eerie phenomenon of staring at your own reflection for too long. Psychologists call it the strange face illusion. If you look into a mirror in dim light for several minutes, your brain begins to distort your own features. Your face melts, changes, even takes on the qualities of others. Some people see monstrous versions of themselves. Others see relatives long gone. The mind, confronted with repetition, invents variation. Even your own reflection refuses to stay stable. The infinite reflections are restless. They will not let you cling to one face forever. Philosophically, this raises the question, are others truly real to you, or are they infinite versions of yourself refracted through memory, perception, and projection? When you look at a crowd, you may think you see dozens of unique beings. But what if you are only seeing your own mental templates repeated again and again, rearranged into convincing diversity? The world could be a mirror maze, and you are the only figure wandering inside it. Mystics have hinted at this for centuries. Tat Tvam Asi. The Upanishads whisper, "Thou art that." In other words, everything you see is yourself. Every face, every gaze, every reflection is a mask worn by the same consciousness. Infinity does not lie out there, but in the endless reflections of you projected upon the world. To see others clearly is to realize they are not others at all. And yet, even if this is true, can you live without the illusion? Could you bear the thought that every smile, every eye, every whisper is your own mind echoing back at you? Perhaps not. Perhaps the infinite reflections are necessary. They create the appearance of difference, of community, of otherness. Without them, you would be alone with your own face, staring into a mirror that never ends. The paradox is sharp. Every face is a reflection of you, and yet the reflections are the only way you know the world. To dissolve them is to dissolve reality itself, and so you live in the infinite hall of mirrors, surrounded by countless faces, all of them yours, all of them projections, stretching into eternity. There is something unsettling about being watched. A portrait on the wall, a statue in a square, even a pair of painted eyes in an ancient tomb. Your brain insists they are looking back at you. You shift your position, and still the gaze follows. The phenomenon is so common it has a name, the Mona Lisa effect. Yet beneath the charm of art there is a deeper truth. The faces you see do not just belong to the world, they are mirrors of your mind. When you feel watched, what you may actually sense is your own consciousness turning upon itself. Neuroscience has studied the human sensitivity to eyes. The whites of the eyes, unique to humans, evolved as social signals. A slight glance to the side communicates intent, fear, or attraction. Your brain is wired to notice this in an instant. But that same wiring also deceives you. A painting cannot move its gaze, a mask cannot change direction, and yet your neurons fire as though it has. The brain projects not only the face, it projects awareness into the face, as if it contained its own inner life. Consider the eerie experience of walking through a gallery at night. The portraits stare silently, their expressions frozen. Rationally, you know they are lifeless pigment, yet some part of you expects them to blink, to whisper, to move. The gaze becomes alive because your mind cannot tolerate a face without imagining a watcher behind it. Every face becomes a projection, but the projection is reciprocal. It feels as though it gazes back. Philosophers have long wondered whether consciousness is shaped by the other's look. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that to be seen by another is to be transformed, objectified, pinned into existence. When you catch someone's eyes across a room, your posture changes, your sense of self shifts. You are no longer only yourself, you are the self being perceived. The paradox deepens when the other may not even exist. The statue's gaze changes you. The puppet's eyes fix you. The doll's stare unnerves you. Even without another mind, your consciousness responds as if one were present. You are shaped by the illusion of being watched. There is also the clinical phenomenon of hypervigilance, often linked to trauma. People who have lived under constant threat may feel eyes on them everywhere. A shifting shadow, a passing stranger. Even the hum of silence becomes charged with presence. The brain overprojects watchers into the environment, seeing faces where none exist. But perhaps this is not a disorder. It is an exaggeration of the very mechanism by which we all navigate the world. The difference is only intensity. Every human lives in a world of watching faces, most of which their mind invented. Think of children's toys. The stuffed animal with glassy eyes. Children confide in them, scold them, comfort them, as if a consciousness dwells within. And then think of your digital world. Video calls where faces stare endlessly into cameras, avatars with fixed expressions in games, AI-generated portraits that look eerily alive. You know they are artificial, and yet your mind assigns them agency, as though they too watch you. In a way, your brain is less concerned with truth than with the performance of awareness. If something has a face, it must also have a gaze, and if it has a gaze, it must be watching. Religious traditions, too, understand the power of the gaze. Icons in Orthodox churches are painted so that their eyes meet yours from every angle. Ancient Egyptian tombs often included false eyes carved into statues to ensure the dead continued to see. Hindu temples place deities with wide, all-seeing eyes at their center. In each case, the worshipper is reminded you are seen. But whether or not the statue or painting perceives, the effect on the worshipper is undeniable. The gaze reshapes their consciousness, reinforcing faith through the illusion of presence. And what of dreams? In dreams, faces stare at you with piercing intensity. Sometimes they know your secrets, sometimes they judge you, sometimes they are simply there, unblinking. Yet those faces are your own unconscious, made visible. To be watched in a dream is to be watched by yourself, though disguised as another. The dream projects the gaze outward, only to fold it back inward, a loop of self-awareness masquerading as external surveillance. There are experiments too. Psychologists have found that simply placing a picture of eyes above a coffee station increases honesty. People are more likely to pay for their drink. The gaze, even when false, modifies behavior. You become moral, not because you are watched, but because you feel watched. A projection disciplines you, even if no one is there. The watching face is not only illusion, it becomes law. This raises a final paradox. If every face is your brain's projection, then every gaze that watches you is also your own. The stranger's stare, the painting's following eyes, the camera's unblinking lens, all of them are internal, not external. You feel watched because your consciousness is always watching itself, reflecting endlessly through the medium of faces. But this realization does not free you. It deepens the trap, because once you know that every gaze is your own, you also know that you can never escape it. The world is filled with faces that watch back, yet none of them belong to others. They are masks you created, sentinels of your own awareness. And when you meet their eyes, you are not encountering another being, you are staring into the mirrored theater of your mind. So walk into a room, and the portraits turn toward you. Sit at your desk, and the webcam silently observes. Pass a stranger on the street, and their eyes meet yours for a fraction of a second, enough to alter your heartbeat. You feel watched because you are, always, everywhere, by the only gaze you cannot escape, the gaze of your own projection, disguised as every face you will ever see. Every culture has masks, from the painted wood of Japanese no theater to the ritual disguises of African ceremonies, from Venetian carnivals to Halloween streets. Humanity has always understood one thing: a face is a mask. Beneath the painted grin or the carved scowl lies another face, but even that face is only another mask. Flesh stretched over bone, expression stretched over consciousness. When you look at others, what you are really seeing may not be their essence at all, but the mask their mind projects. And when you meet their gaze, you are wearing one too. Psychologists argue that much of social interaction is performance. Irving Goffman, in The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, described humans as actors on a stage, constantly managing impressions. You smile to signal warmth, furrow your brows to feign concern, tilt your head to express curiosity. None of these gestures are pure. They are masks, scripts rehearsed so many times they feel natural, but remain projections nonetheless. The consciousness behind them hides in silence, invisible. Consider the phenomenon of micro-expressions. A flicker of anger, a twitch of fear, a spark of joy crosses a face in less than a quarter of a second. You rarely notice, yet your brain does, projecting a story about the person you see. But is that story about them, or about you? You read their mask, filter it through your memory, and decide what lies beneath. In truth, you may only be decoding yourself. Their face is an empty canvas, painted with the colors of your own mind. The philosopher Sartre described the look of the other as something that fixes you, makes you aware of yourself as object. To be seen is to be masked, because suddenly your behavior is filtered through the imagined gaze of another. You laugh differently, sit differently, even breathe differently when you know eyes are upon you. The mask of consciousness tightens, you become not yourself, but the performance of yourself reflected in their imagined judgment. You are not free, you are projected. Think of the strange experience of talking to someone in costume. A clown, a superhero, a ghost. The mask shifts how you perceive them, even if you know who they are beneath it. Their consciousness becomes fused with the mask, and your brain cannot separate the two. But isn't this also true without costumes? A businessman's suit, a teenager's hoodie, a priest's robe, each is a mask you project meaning upon. You never see the raw consciousness beneath, only the attire and expression your brain transforms into identity. Neuroscience reminds us that the face is only a surface. Beneath lies a network of electrical patterns, neurons firing in silent code. Yet your perception gives those patterns human form. You cannot see synapses, you see smiles. You cannot hear neurotransmitters, you hear laughter. Consciousness itself is masked because the brain cannot present itself directly. It must wear the costume of the face, and your brain, upon witnessing it, weaves another mask, one that may or may not align with the truth. Now imagine a conversation. You look at their face, they look at yours. Each of you wears a mask. Each of you projects meaning. But here's the paradox. The mask is not simply concealing something, it is also creating it. A smile may begin as a performance, but when mirrored back by another, it becomes real. Consciousness constructs itself through masks, feeding on projection until the mask is indistinguishable from the face beneath. Dreams expose this further. In dreams you encounter countless faces, each vivid, each expressive. They smile, frown, cry, rage, yet none of them exist. They are masks worn by your own unconscious, fragments of yourself disguised as others. The dream mask is proof. Consciousness cannot appear to itself without projecting a face. The mask is not an accessory. It is the essential medium of perception. There is also the uncanny experience of stillness. A mannequin, a wax figure, a corpse. These too wear masks, faces frozen in artificial repose, and yet, your brain projects life into them, even if only for a moment. A flicker of fear, an instinctive recognition. Perhaps they will move, perhaps they will look back. This is the mask of consciousness turned inside out. Your brain creating awareness where none exists, as if incapable of accepting that a face could be anything but alive. Philosophically, this suggests a troubling possibility. You have never seen another's consciousness directly, you have only ever seen masks. The twitch of a lip, the gleam of an eye, the crease of a brow. These are not windows into a mind, but screens upon which your own mind projects. You assume there is something behind them, but you cannot know for sure. The mask is all you have. The mask may be all there is. Even your own reflection betrays you. When you look into the mirror, you do not see raw consciousness. You see your practiced mask, the version of you arranged for others, the face sculpted by years of habit and expectation, and sometimes, staring long enough, you sense the hollowness behind it. Who is looking back? The reflection wears your mask, but it does not speak. The consciousness beneath remains hidden, unknowable, silent. Religions and mystics have long described life as a masquerade. The Hindu concept of Maya suggests the world itself is a mask, veiling ultimate reality. Zen teachers speak of removing masks to glimpse pure awareness, though even in silence the masks return, subtle and inescapable. Perhaps consciousness requires masks as much as lungs require air. Without them you would drown in the void of faceless existence. The paradox becomes clear. Faces are masks, and masks are faces. Consciousness hides behind them, but also exists only through them. To remove all masks would not reveal truth. It would erase the stage upon which truth can appear at all. You would vanish with them. So you continue to live behind the mask, projecting, perceiving, mistaking performance for essence. And in every gaze you meet, you see not the person, but the mask of consciousness your brain insists upon. Behind it lies mystery, forever veiled, forever unreachable. The final question whispers, is there anyone there at all, behind the mask you call a face? Silence is not empty. Silence has a weight, a presence, and sometimes, it has eyes. You know the feeling. You are sitting in a quiet room, maybe alone, maybe with one other person, and though no words are spoken, their gaze presses against you like a hand on your chest. Or worse, there is no one there at all, yet the silence still feels charged, as if unseen eyes linger in its folds. This is the silent gaze illusion. the sense that in stillness, in absence, something continues to watch. Science begins to explain. Human beings evolved as hyper-social creatures, and your brain is designed to detect eyes faster than almost any other object. This vigilance once saved your ancestors, recognizing predators lurking in the grass, or rivals in the shadows. But the wiring persists even now. A slight shadow, a vague outline, even the placement of 2 dots can convince your mind that a pair of eyes is present. In silence, without words to distract, the brain amplifies these cues. Stillness becomes a canvas upon which it paints a watcher. Consider the experience of being in a library late at night. The air is hushed, the bookshelves loom like sentinels, and your footsteps echo too loudly. You glance around and find nothing, yet your skin prickles as though observed. Silence does not reassure, it accuses. The absence of sound sharpens your sensitivity to faces, real or imagined. Every carved bust becomes alive. Every portrait whispers. Every shadow watches. The gaze hides in the quiet, waiting for your mind to invent it. Philosophy takes this further. Emmanuel Levinas spoke of the infinite demand in the human face. The way the mere existence of another gaze obligates you, calls you into responsibility. But what happens when there is no other, and yet the obligation remains? The silent gaze illusion creates an ethical paradox. You feel answerable to something, someone, some consciousness, implied but absent. Silence becomes a courtroom, and you are the only defendant. Religious traditions thrive on this illusion. In monasteries, silence is cultivated so the presence of God can be felt. In prayer, the bowed head and closed eyes create the sensation of being watched by an eternal gaze that does not speak. Ancient rituals often demanded silence as an entry point to the divine, precisely because silence magnifies the projection of unseen eyes. In stillness, the believer feels judged, guided, protected, not by anyone visible but by the face their mind places in the void. There are experiments too. In studies of sleep paralysis, individuals often report the sense of being observed by a dark presence in the room. The body cannot move, the silence is suffocating, and into that silence, the brain inserts a watcher. Sometimes it has a face, sometimes not, but always it gazes. Neuroscientists explain this as a misfiring of the brain's hyperactive social circuits during paralysis. Yet to those who endure it, the watcher feels more real than waking life. The illusion becomes terror. Art exploits the silent gaze illusion as well. A single spotlight on a stage, a still actor facing the audience without speaking, the silence grows unbearable because the gaze feels endless. In film, directors create dread, not by showing monsters but by holding silence too long, with a camera that feels like eyes. You become the subject of the shot. The watcher is not in the frame, it is the silence in which you squirm. Psychologically, this illusion reveals a truth about consciousness itself. You are never unobserved, because you are never free of your own awareness. Even in solitude, you are watched by your inner eye, the narrator behind your thoughts, the mirror of self. The silent gaze illusion is not just projection, it is the lived recognition that the mind is a divided stage, audience and actor fused. When the world falls quiet, that duality sharpens, and the watcher grows undeniable. Imagine being in a forest at night. No wind, no animals, only silence thick enough to feel. You scan the trees and see no one, yet you hurry your pace. The gaze is not there, but it is there, etched into your perception by millions of years of survival. Your brain cannot stop inventing witnesses, even when none exist. The silence is alive with faces, though they are only yours. And there is a paradox here. The more you notice the illusion, the stronger it becomes. The more you insist that no one is watching, the heavier the silence presses, as if defying you. To believe yourself unobserved is nearly impossible, because observation is built into the structure of your mind. The silence is a mirror, and you are always on stage. So the next time you sit in a quiet room and feel a gaze upon you, remember this: it is not the room, not the shadows, not even a hidden presence. It is you, your consciousness projecting its watchfulness outward, disguising itself as another. The silent gaze does not come from the world. It is the echo of your own awareness reflected back through stillness. And that is why silence feels haunted. Not because anyone is there, but because you are, always watching, always seen, even when the world makes no sound. There is a moment, quiet, terrifying, liberating, when the face dissolves. Not just the face of the stranger in the crowd, not just the gaze in the silence, but even your own. The final vanishing face is not a trick of perception, but the ultimate destination of projection. The realization that the very idea of face has always been a story your brain insisted upon, and when the story falters, what remains is nothing. Think of the mirror meditation experiment. Stare at your reflection long enough in dim light, and the features begin to warp. The eyes widen unnaturally, the mouth stretches. Sometimes another identity entirely stares back, and sometimes, most unsettling, it simply vanishes. The surface no longer carries a face at all, just shifting patches of skin, shadow, and blur. The mind cannot hold on to its projection, and in that failure, a deeper truth is revealed. The face was never really there. Neuroscience offers a mechanical answer. The brain's face recognition system, the fusiform face area, operates by prediction and correction. It constantly guesses what a face should look like, fills in gaps, and smooths inconsistencies. But under stress, fatigue, or prolonged fixation, the predictions break down. The illusion collapses. You see the raw data without the comforting mask of identity. What you thought was a self becomes a field of patterns, no longer bound together. Yet philosophy whispers something different. The Buddhist doctrine of anatta, or no self, claims that identity is a bundle of processes, not a fixed entity. The vanishing of the face is not a glitch, it is a glimpse of reality. The self you thought was coherent dissolves into fragments, as impersonal as clouds in the wind. In that vanishing there is terror, because you are losing what you thought was you. But there is also freedom, because what disappears was never solid to begin with. Consider the Tibetan meditation on the skull. Practitioners visualize faces peeling away to bone, bone dissolving to dust, until nothing remains but empty space. This is not morbidity but clarity, to see that even the most intimate image, the human face, cannot be grasped. The final vanishing face is the death of projection, the stripping away of illusion until only emptiness looks back. There is an experiment in psychology, called the Troxler effect. Fix your eyes on a single point, and surrounding details slowly fade from perception. Applied to the face, this means features can literally disappear if you hold your gaze. You are not losing the face, your brain is simply refusing to refresh it. What you see is not erasure, but neglect. Still, the effect is uncanny, proof that the continuity of identity is sustained only by the brain's constant maintenance. Without effort, the image of a face withers into blankness. Art has long played with this vanishing. Painters like Francis Bacon disassembled faces into smears and shrieks, as though the mask itself was slipping away under the brush. Surrealists twisted faces into impossible geometries to show how fragile the illusion of personhood really is. Even in cinema, a lingering close-up held too long makes the face dissolve into something alien. The familiar becomes strange, and the strange becomes nothing. Now imagine this on the deepest level, not just the disappearance of a face in the mirror, not just the stranger fading into anonymity, but the final vanishing of all faces. Every projection, every memory, every imagined gaze extinguished. A world without faces is not empty of people, it is empty of your brain's insistence on their coherence. Bodies remain, eyes remain, expressions remain, but the concept of face no longer glues them together. The scaffolding collapses. And here lies the paradox. If every face you have ever seen is a projection, then the vanishing of the face is not a loss but the unveiling of reality. You have not lost truth. You have lost the illusion that there was ever a fixed truth to begin with. What fades is not reality, but the mask your mind paints over it. Sit with that for a moment. The faces of loved ones, of strangers, of yourself, each one a ghost held together by neural insistence. Each one projected onto patterns of light and shadow. Each one destined to vanish when the brain finally stops sustaining the lie. In the end, all faces fall away. The smile, the gaze, the intimacy of recognition, all dissolve into the raw fabric of perception, and then into nothing. So what happens when the final vanishing face arrives? Perhaps terror, perhaps freedom, perhaps both at once. You are left with the silence behind identity, the pure field of awareness without projections. Nothing watches, nothing is watched. The gaze collapses into emptiness, and in that void, the greatest paradox of all emerges. When every face disappears, you finally see reality as it is, faceless, infinite, and unknowable. The final vanishing face is not just theirs, it is yours. The image you carried of yourself, sustained by mirrors, by recognition, by memory, slips away. What remains when the last projection dissolves? Not you, not another. Only the vast silent field where faces once were. And in that field, there is no ending, because there was never a beginning. The final vanishing face is not loss. It is return. You have traveled through memory's fragile lenses, through mirrors that distort, neurons that paint, and strangers who are already known. You have seen how the smile is not a smile but a shape your brain rehearses, how the gaze in the crowd is not theirs but yours, projected outward, how shadows, masks, doppelgängers, and even digital phantoms arise from the same machinery. Each face was a chapter, but each chapter whispered the same truth. Nothing you have ever seen was really there. From the hollow mask to the inversion paradox, from the uncanny valley to the composite effect, you were never meeting a face. You were meeting your brain's insistence that one existed. And what of your own? That self reflected in glass, that body recognized by others, that continuity you clutch at. It too was projection. The final vanishing face was always yours. Think back. Faces made of memory taught you that even your most cherished impressions were stitched from fragments. The mirror illusion showed how easily reflection collapses. Neurons painting the stranger proved that recognition is invention. Echoes of familiarity. The composite face effect. Dream faces in waking. Each one chipped away at the lie, until finally, in the final vanishing face, the projection dissolved entirely. But what does it mean to live knowing that every face, even your own, was never there? Does it mean you are free, released from the weight of identity? Or does it mean you are lost, condemned to wander in a faceless field where every smile, every gaze, every intimacy collapses into dust? This is the paradox. You cannot step outside the projection, yet you cannot prove it real. To see a face is to know it is your brain's work, yet you cannot stop seeing it. To lose a face is to glimpse truth, yet truth feels like nothing. And so the script loops back on itself. The introduction asked, what if every face you see is only projection? 30 sections later, the answer is both nothing and everything. You saw the illusions, the tricks, the distortions. You saw the brain struggling to sustain coherence, then failing, then showing you emptiness. And now here you are, staring at these very words, imagining the face of the one who wrote them, my face, though I have none. Even here, in this moment, you are projecting a face where there is only text. That is the final recursion. Even the storyteller is your brain's invention, another face painted onto shadows. When you look for me, you look only at yourself. When you look for yourself, you find only another projection. And in the silence after, when even these words dissolve, when the story collapses and the gaze fades, you are left with the only truth that was ever possible. There were never any faces at all. Only emptiness, wearing the mask of recognition. Only projection, mistaken for reality. Only you, and not you, and the vanishing space between. And now, the loop closes.